After 5 years of absolute silence, my daughter finally called. I was overjoyed, but my wife said, "Do not get too excited, just listen carefully." I asked, "What is going on?" She replied, "She called you Dad, but are you sure you heard that right?" Instantly, my heart went cold. Secrets are never silent. My name is Rodney. I am 69 years old, and for the past 4 decades, I built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up in the most competitive markets in the country. I traded my tailored suits for comfortable sweaters years ago, living a quiet and humble life with my wife, Camille. We live modestly. Nobody in our quiet neighborhood knows the actual numbers sitting in my bank accounts. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking my black coffee when my phone buzzed on the granite counter. The caller identification flashed a name I had not seen in 5 years. Kendra, my daughter. The same daughter who walked out of my life and cut all ties. My hand actually shook as I reached for the device. I missed the call, but a voicemail notification immediately popped up. I tapped the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. I put it on speaker so Camille could hear the voice of our only child. But the voice that filled our kitchen was not speaking to me. It was a pocket dial. Kendra was talking to someone else in a rushed, breathless tone. "Dad, the paperwork is finally done. The medical records for the old man are signed and stamped. By this Friday, the entire account will be ours and we can finally put him away where he belongs." The recording ended abruptly with the harsh sound of a car door slamming shut. I sat there completely paralyzed. The fresh coffee in my mug suddenly smelled like burning ash. My own flesh and blood, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, was actively plotting to lock me away in a facility and steal my entire life work. I stared at the blank phone screen, my mind racing to comprehend the sheer malice in her voice. I was ready to dial her number right back, to scream into the receiver to demand an explanation for this ultimate betrayal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I grabbed the phone to call Kendra back. I wanted to unleash a hurricane of rage on her. But Camille placed her warm, steady hand over mine, pressing the phone down against the table. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and completely devoid of any panic. "Do not call her back. Rodney," she said, her voice low and firm. "Did you actually listen to what she said? She called the person on the other end Dad. She was not talking to you, she was talking to Richard." The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Richard was Blake's father. Blake was the white man Kendra married 5 years ago against my explicit and stern warnings. I never liked Blake. He paraded around in designer clothes and constantly talked about his family being old money, but my instincts told me he was nothing but a cheap hustler wearing a nice watch. Richard, his father, was a former bank executive who always looked at me with poorly disguised disdain. He tolerated my presence only because he could smell my wealth. When I refused to finance Blake and his ridiculous startup venture, Kendra blew up at me. She called me a controlling old fool who could not stand to see her happy with a successful man. She packed her bags, moved into their privileged world, and never looked back. Camille squeezed my hand, bringing me back to the present reality. She paced the kitchen floor, her brilliant mind working several steps ahead. "If Kendra and Richard have forged medical documents, they are trying to declare you incompetent," Camille reasoned. "They want to seize your assets legally without a fight. They think you are just a tired old man who will quietly surrender and fade away." Camille was absolutely right. I had spent the last 5 years letting Kendra live her life, hoping she would eventually wake up and realize her husband and father-in-law were using her. I had kept my distance out of unconditional love, but this was no longer a mere family dispute. This was a hostile takeover. They were using my daughter as a pawn to access my wealth, and she was willingly playing their twisted game. I felt a cold, hard resolve replace the deep sorrow in my chest. I wiped the tears I did not even realize I had shed. I was not just a retired old man watering his lawn in the suburbs. I was a ruthless businessman who survived the toughest real estate markets, and they were about to find out exactly who they were dealing with. I immediately dialed the private priority number for my primary bank. I needed to move my liquid assets into a secure trust before Richard and his son could get their greedy hands on a single penny. The phone rang twice before a representative answered. "Good morning, this is Priority Services. How can I help you?" I gave the representative my account number and my secure identification PIN code. "I need to freeze all outward transfers and lock down my primary accounts immediately," I commanded. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Then there was a long, agonizing pause. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes terrible news. Mr. Rodney, the representative, began, his voice tight with sudden professional hesitation. I am looking at your profile right now, and I am afraid I cannot process any requests for you at this time. What do you mean you cannot process my requests? I asked, my voice rising in anger. That is my money. I am the primary account holder. I am sorry, sir, the representative replied, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. But your accounts were officially frozen early this morning. We received a court-approved medical power of attorney stating that you are no longer mentally capable of managing your financial affairs. The designated guardian is listed as Kendra. My breath caught in my throat. They moved faster than I could have ever anticipated. They did not just talk about it on that voicemail. They had already executed their malicious plan. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. Who submitted this document? I demanded. The representative cleared his throat nervously. It was submitted in person at our downtown branch by your daughter and a Mr. Richard. They provided signed affidavits from 2 medical professionals certifying your severe cognitive decline. We are legally bound to suspend your access until the guardianship hearing is officially completed. I hung up the phone without saying another word. The reality of the situation crashed down on me with terrifying clarity. I was completely locked out of my own life. The millions of dollars I had earned, the legacy I had meticulously built to protect my family was now sitting in a vault, waiting to be handed over to the very people orchestrating my demise. Camille looked at me, her face pale but her posture unyielding. What did they do? She asked softly. They locked me out, I said, my voice dangerously calm. They used fake medical records to seize control of the accounts. They actually think they have won. I walked past the kitchen island and grabbed my car keys from the wooden bowl. I was not going to hire a lawyer to write a polite letter. I was not going to sit in my house and wait for a court summons to declare me insane. I was going to the downtown branch to handle this my way. But as I grabbed the door handle, I knew the war had just begun. I parked my car in the reserved executive spot outside the downtown branch of Vanguard Horizon Bank. The morning sun glared off the towering glass facade, but I felt no warmth. I walked through the revolving doors with a measured, even stride. I did not go to the teller line. I bypassed the velvet ropes and walked directly toward the mahogany double doors of the branch manager office. David, the branch manager, looked up from his desk. He was a man in his late 40s who usually greeted me with a wide smile and a firm handshake. Today, all color drained from his face the exact moment he saw me. Mr. Rodney, he stammered, standing up so fast his leather chair hit the wall behind him. I did not expect to see you here today. I closed the heavy door behind me, shutting out the hum of the main lobby. Sit down, David, I commanded. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. I need you to reverse the freeze on my accounts immediately. I know my daughter and her father-in-law were here. I know what lies they handed you. David swallowed hard, his eyes darting to a thick manila folder resting on his desk. Sir, I am so sorry, he began, his voice shaking. But my hands are completely tied. They presented a medical power of attorney signed by a judge along with 2 sworn affidavits from licensed psychiatrists. The court order declares you mentally unfit to authorize transactions. The legal department flagged your profile. I cannot override a court mandate. I stood in front of his desk perfectly still. Do I look mentally unfit to you, David? I asked, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do I sound like a man who has lost his mind? You have known me for 15 years. You know exactly how sharp I am. David wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. I know, sir. You seem perfectly fine to me. But the bank operates on legal documentation, not personal observation. Richard brought his own corporate lawyers. They threatened to hold the bank liable if we allowed you to touch the funds. By law, your daughter Kendra is now the sole guardian of your estate. Until you challenge this in court and win, I am locked out of the system. I cannot even view your balances anymore. I let his words hang in the air. Richard thought he had played the perfect game of chess. He used the legal system as a weapon, assuming I would be trapped behind a wall of bureaucracy. He expected me to hire a lawyer and spend months fighting in family court while he and Blake drained my life savings. But Richard made a fatal miscalculation. He saw an old black man who wore comfortable sweaters and drove a 5-year-old sedan. He saw a retired grandfather he could easily bully. He never bothered to research how I actually made my money before I retired. He never looked into the foundation of this very bank. David, I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. Turn your computer monitor toward me and open the executive terminal protocol. David blinked in confusion. Sir, I just told you I do not have access. Open the terminal, I repeated, stepping closer to his desk. Just do it. Reluctantly, David turned his monitor and opened the black screen of the internal banking system. It prompted him for an override authorization. Now I instructed type exactly what I tell you. Capital V, capital H, 749 protocol, Omega 001. David's fingers trembled as he typed the sequence. He hit the enter key. The screen went completely blank for 3 seconds. Then it flashed a bright green authorization granted message that David had clearly never seen before in his career. His jaw dropped. The system bypassed the legal department freeze entirely and granted full, unrestricted master access to all my accounts. How did you do that? David gasped, staring at the screen in pure shock. That is a founding shareholder override code. Only board members have that level of clearance. I leaned over the desk, resting my hands on the polished wood. I did not just open a checking account here, David. 40 years ago, when I was building my commercial real estate empire, I bought the land this very building sits on. I developed the entire financial district skyline you see out your window. When this bank was struggling to expand in the 90s, I provided the capital to open 30 branches across the state. I am not just a client. I am one of the 5 founding silent partners of Vanguard Horizon Bank. I own a substantial percentage of the institution that pays your salary. My daughter thinks she can use a piece of paper to lock me out of my own vault. But she forgot that I am the one who built the vault. David stared at me with newfound awe and terror. I had kept my identity as a silent partner hidden for decades because true power does not need to announce itself. But now the gloves were off. I was no longer the quiet retiree playing along with the world. The ruthless real estate shark who devoured competitors in the 80s was fully awake and ready to hunt. Now, David, I said, pointing at the screen, we are going to do some financial housekeeping. First, I want you to initiate a complete transfer of my $80 million liquid portfolio into a secure blind trust. Name me as the sole trustee and Camille as the sole beneficiary upon my death. The fake medical power of attorney they filed only applies to my personal accounts. It holds absolutely zero legal weight over a corporate blind trust. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the commands without hesitation. Consider it done, sir, he said, his voice laced with adrenaline. Good, I replied. Now let us address the leeches. Pull up the supplementary credit cards connected to my business lines. I watched as the screen displayed 3 premium credit accounts. 1 belonged to Kendra. 2 were joint accounts she shared with Blake. Over the past 5 years, I had kept those lines of credit open out of a misplaced sense of fatherly guilt. I had let them live their lavish lifestyle on my dime while they mocked me behind my back. Cancel them all, I ordered coldly. Flag them as stolen so any pending transactions are immediately declined. Freeze the trust funds I set up for Blake Fake Startup Company and revoke the collateral backing I provided for the mortgage on Richard Mansion. I want every single financial cord cut. Within 5 minutes, the digital massacre was complete. Richard thought he was walking away with my fortune today. Instead, by dinner time, his son's credit cards would bounce at the grocery store and his own house would face foreclosure protocols. I thanked David, adjusted my coat, and walked out of the manager office. The bank lobby felt different now. I walked through the revolving doors and stepped out into the crisp morning air, feeling a surge of triumph. I had secured my legacy and set the trap for their ultimate downfall. I reached into my pocket to pull out my car keys, ready to drive home and tell Camille the good news, but my victory was violently interrupted. A large, unmarked white van suddenly swerved around the corner and screeched to a halt directly in front of my car, blocking my exit. The side doors slid open with a harsh metal clatter. Blake stepped out onto the pavement. He was wearing his usual smug smile and a tailored suit bought with my money. But he was not alone. Behind him, 2 massive men stepped out of the van. They were dressed in clinical white medical scrubs. One of them was holding a heavy canvas psychiatric restraint jacket with thick leather straps. My blood ran cold as the reality of the situation locked into place. They were not waiting for a court date to institutionalize me. Blake stepped forward and looked me right in the eye, his smile twisting into a malicious grin. "Good morning, father-in-law," he sneered. "You have been acting very erratic lately. It is time for your treatment. We are taking you to a safe facility where you can finally get the psychological help you need." I stood rooted to the concrete, staring at the canvas straitjacket in the large man's hands. Blake smirked, expecting me to panic, to shout, or to make a scene that would only validate their false claims of my mental instability. I did none of those things. I simply checked my watch. Before the two massive goons could take another step toward me, a sleek black town car pulled up violently against the curb tires, screeching. The rear door flew open and my wife Camille stepped out. She did not look like a frightened spouse. She looked like a general arriving at the front lines. Right behind her was Arthur Holloway. Holloway was not a family court attorney. He was a corporate litigator who specialized in destroying hostile takeovers, and he was a shark in a tailored suit. Holloway marched directly up to Blake, completely ignoring the two muscle-bound thugs. "I see you are attempting an involuntary psychiatric hold," Blake Holloway said, his voice booming across the parking lot. "Please present the court-mandated order signed by a superior court judge authorizing the physical detainment of my client." Blake faltered, his smug smile vanishing. He pulled out the fake medical power of attorney. "I am his designated guardian," Blake stammered. "I have the legal right to seek medical treatment for his cognitive decline." Holloway let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He snatched the paper from Blake. Hands glanced at it and shoved it back against his chest. "A medical power of attorney gives you the right to make healthcare decisions if the patient is incapacitated. It does not give you the right to orchestrate a kidnapping on a public street. If these two unlicensed contractors touch a single hair on Mr. Rodney Head, I will personally see to it that all three of you face federal abduction charges. I will bury you under so many lawsuits your grandchildren will be paying my retainer." The two thugs looked at each other. They were hired muscle, likely paid in cash, and they wanted no part of a federal prison sentence. They backed away slowly, tossing the canvas jacket back into the van. Blake's face turned a sickly shade of pale. "This is not over," he spat, trying to salvage his shattered pride. "Your mind is gone, old man. We are just trying to help you. Get in your van and drive away." "Blake," I said finally, breaking my silence, "before I decide to buy the company you leased that vehicle from and fire you myself." Blake turned on his heel and scrambled into the passenger seat. The van sped off, leaving the scent of burning rubber in its wake. Camille walked over and linked her arm through mine. "They are getting desperate," she noted coldly. I nodded. "Desperation makes people sloppy. Let us go home. We need to prepare for their next move." That evening, the house was shrouded in a heavy silence. Camille and I had spent the afternoon reinforcing our security protocols and installing discreet micro cameras in my home office and the kitchen. We knew the failed ambush at the bank would force them to change tactics. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I checked the security monitor. It was Kendra. She was standing alone on the porch, shivering slightly in the cool night air. I opened the door and played my part perfectly. I let my shoulders slump. I slowed my breathing and allowed my hands to tremble just a fraction. "Dad," Kendra whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. "I am so sorry," she sobbed. "I am so sorry for everything." I stood there letting her hug me, but my heart felt like a block of ice. 5 years ago, this embrace would have brought tears of joy to my eyes. Now it only filled me with absolute disgust. I could smell the expensive perfume she bought using the credit cards I had just canceled. I could feel the cold calculation beneath her trembling performance. "What are you doing here, Kendra?" I asked, keeping my tone weary and confused. "I missed you, Dad," she lied, stepping back and wiping away a non-existent tear. "I heard about what happened at the bank today. Blake is completely out of control. I had no idea he was going to try something so drastic. I swear to you, I only signed those medical papers because Richard convinced me you were sick and needed help. I thought I was protecting you." I looked at the woman standing in my hallway. She was wearing the mask of a terrified, loving daughter perfectly. If I had not heard that voicemail, if I had not spent 40 years reading the faces of corporate liars, I might have believed her. But I knew the truth. She was the architect of my demise, playing the victim to get back inside my defenses. "Come in," I muttered, shuffling slowly toward the living room, acting every bit the exhausted senior citizen they believed me to be. Camille greeted her with a tight, polite smile, perfectly matching my charade. Kendra sat on the sofa, wringing her hands anxiously. "You look so tired, Dad," she said, her eyes scanning the room, assessing her environment. "Why do you not sit back and rest? Let me make you a cup of herbal tea and get your evening medication. I want to take care of you tonight." Camille and I exchanged a fleeting, imperceptible glance. The bait was set. I settled into my large leather armchair in the study, closing my eyes and letting out a long, rattling sigh. Within minutes, I slowed my breathing to a rhythmic hum, mimicking the deep sleep of an exhausted old man. Camille excused herself to the laundry room, leaving Kendra completely unsupervised. I kept my eyes shut, but my mind was fully alert, listening to the soft padding of her footsteps. Meanwhile, Camille was in the utility room, watching the live feed from the newly installed micro cameras on her tablet. Kendra did not go straight to the kitchen to make tea. She crept directly into my study. I could hear the faint rustle of her clothing as she approached my mahogany desk. Through my barely parted eyelashes, I saw her scan the room. Believing she was entirely alone, she pulled a small, unmarked plastic bottle from her designer handbag. She reached for my daily pill organizer sitting near my reading lamp. Her hands moved with terrifying, practiced efficiency. She opened the Wednesday compartment, took out my prescribed blood pressure medication, and swapped it with identical-looking white pills from her own bottle. She pocketed my real medication and snapped the organizer shut. My blood boiled. They were no longer just trying to declare me incompetent. They were actively medicating me to guarantee I would exhibit the symptoms of severe cognitive decline. Or worse, they were trying to induce a fatal medical event. But her mission was not over. She slipped over to my desktop computer. She pulled a silver USB flash drive from her pocket and plugged it into the back of the tower. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was installing a mirroring program to bypass my security firewalls and steal my encrypted digital signature. Richard needed that signature to authorize the transfer of my commercial real estate deeds without requiring my physical presence at a notary. She waited for the small green light on the flash drive to blink rapidly, indicating the download was complete. She yanked the drive out, slipped it back into her pocket, and silently glided out of the study toward the kitchen. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. I opened my eyes, staring at the empty doorway. The sheer audacity of her actions confirmed that there was no line she and Richard would not cross. A few minutes later, Kendra returned holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea and my tampered pill organizer. "Here you go, Dad," she murmured, handing me the cup with a sweet, angelic smile. "Drink this and take your pills. You will feel much better in the morning." I looked at the pills in her palm. I smiled back, taking them from her hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said softly. "You have no idea how much better I am going to feel." I pretended to swallow the pills, washing them down with a sip of tea, but I slipped them neatly under my tongue. She stayed for another 20 minutes, chatting about nothing before kissing my cheek and walking out the front door. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I spit the toxic pills into a napkin. Camille walked into the study holding the tablet with the recorded footage. "We have it all," she said, her voice laced with steel. I stared at the white pills resting in my palm. They wanted to play a dangerous game of chemistry and theft. They thought they had successfully stolen my signature and poisoned my mind. I pulled out my phone and dialed my private investigator. It was time to dig into the aristocratic garbage of Richard family and expose the rotting foundation they were standing on. The next morning, I did not go to my usual golf club or tend to my garden. I drove straight to a private toxicology laboratory owned by an old business associate. I handed him the napkin containing the white pills Kendra had so lovingly offered me the night before. I paid for an expedited emergency analysis. I sat in his sterile waiting room for 2 hours, sipping terrible instant coffee and staring at the blank white wall. When my friend finally emerged from the back lab, his face was pale. He closed the door behind him and placed a printed report on the glass table. "Rodney," he said, his voice tight with genuine concern, "whoever gave you these was not trying to manage your blood pressure. They were trying to completely destroy your brain." I looked down at the chemical breakdown printed on the paper. The pills were a highly dangerous cocktail of heavy sedatives and synthetic hallucinogens. My friend explained that taking even one of these would induce extreme confusion, paranoia, and vivid visual hallucinations. Over a period of a few short days, they would cause a total cognitive collapse, mimicking the most aggressive and rapid stages of severe dementia. If I had swallowed those pills while Kendra was sitting in my living room, I would have been wandering the streets screaming at imaginary threats by midnight. Blake and his fake medical goons would have swooped right in to collect me without any resistance. A judge would have looked at my resulting medical state and permanently stripped away my human rights without a second thought. My own daughter was willing to chemically lobotomize me just to get her hands on my bank accounts. I thanked my friend, folded the toxicology report, and placed it in the inner pocket of my coat. I walked out to my car and dialed Camille. "They tried to drug me into an asylum," I told her, my voice steady and cold. Camille did not gasp or cry. Her response was immediate and sharp. "We add attempted poisoning and grievous bodily harm to the list," she said. "Bring the report home right now. Our private investigator just arrived and you need to see what he dug up on Richard and his precious family tree." I pulled into my driveway and walked straight into my study. Camille was sitting at the mahogany desk across from Marcus, my private investigator. Marcus was a former federal agent who specialized in forensic accounting and corporate fraud. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He pushed a thick black binder toward me. "You were right to trust your instincts about your son-in-law," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Blake and his father Richard have been playing a massive con game for the last decade. They parade around the local country club acting like they are the heirs to some vast old money aristocratic fortune. The truth is their family went entirely bankrupt 8 years ago." I opened the binder and scanned the highlighted documents. It was an absolute financial massacre. Richard had been quietly terminated from his banking executive position for embezzling client funds. To avoid a public scandal and prison time, he was forced to surrender all his stock options and pay millions in restitution. Their sprawling estate was leveraged to the maximum limit and heavily mortgaged. They were drowning in toxic debt, juggling loans from violent private lenders and dodging collection agencies by using offshore shell companies. "They are completely broke," I murmured, reading a foreclosure notice that had been temporarily stalled by a suspicious legal injunction. "Worse than broke," Marcus corrected. "They are desperate. And that is exactly why Blake targeted Kendra 5 years ago. They saw a smart, wealthy black woman with a rich father and they zeroed in like starving vultures. They used her to maintain their country club facade. The fancy cars they drive are leased under her name. The extravagant dinners they host are funded by the credit lines you provided. Richard hates you, Rodney. He despises the fact that a self-made black man holds the wealth he believes he is inherently entitled to by birthright. He views your money as his ultimate salvation. They groomed Kendra, turned her against you, and isolated her so they could eventually drain your empire. The sheer racial and financial arrogance of their scheme made my blood boil. They looked down on me while quietly eating from my table. They thought they could outsmart me because of their supposed pedigree, but they were nothing but common thieves wearing expensive tailored suits, hiding behind a fake legacy. "But financial ruin is not the only thing they are hiding," Marcus said, pulling a small digital tablet from his briefcase. He tapped the screen and slid it across my desk. "You need to see this. It changes the entire dynamic of their operation." I looked at the screen. It was surveillance video footage taken late last night. The camera was pointed at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a luxury downtown apartment. Through the glass, I clearly saw Blake. He was pouring 2 glasses of expensive champagne. A woman walked into the frame wearing a silk robe. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him passionately. It was definitely not Kendra. I stared at the woman, trying to place her face. "Who is she?" I asked, feeling a strange mix of anger for my daughter and vindication for my long-held instincts. "Her name is Chloe," Marcus replied. "She is the senior legal secretary at the law firm Richard currently uses. She is the one drawing up the fake property transfer deeds. She is the one who drafted the fraudulent medical power of attorney. And she is Blake's actual partner." I watched the video as Blake handed Chloe a glass of champagne, raising his glass in a celebratory toast. They were celebrating their impending payday. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a horrifying picture. Blake did not love Kendra. He never did. Kendra was nothing but a biological key to unlock my bank vault. Once they used the stolen digital signature from the USB drive to transfer my commercial real estate to their shell company, and once they had me locked away in a psychiatric ward, they were going to dispose of her. They would leave Kendra holding the bag for the forgery and the poisoning, while Blake and Chloe vanished with the liquidated assets. "They are going to frame her," Camille said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "They are going to take the money and leave our daughter to take the fall for all the federal crimes they committed. They are setting her up to go to prison." I looked at the frozen frame of Blake's smiling face. My daughter had betrayed me. She had stolen from me. She had even tried to drug me. But she was still my daughter, and I was not going to let a pair of bankrupt racist con artists destroy her life and walk away with my legacy. The risk had just escalated significantly. We were no longer just fighting a financial battle. We were dealing with a coordinated criminal conspiracy. Richard and Blake were moving fast to close the deal. I closed the black binder and handed the tablet back to Marcus. "They think they have the upper hand," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "They think my mind is failing and my signature is theirs. It is time we invite them to dinner." Let us see how well these fake aristocrats can perform when they think they have finally won. Richard actually beat us to the punch. The very next morning, he called my house with a booming, overly friendly voice inviting Camille and me to a formal dinner at his estate. He claimed it was to celebrate family unity and check in on my health. I knew exactly what it really was. It was a hunting expedition. He wanted to observe my supposed cognitive decline up close, and perhaps record my behavior as further proof for his fraudulent guardianship case. I accepted his invitation using the weak, trembling voice of a defeated and confused man. That evening, Camille and I drove up the long, winding driveway of Richard's sprawling stone mansion. Marcus, our private investigator, had already informed us that this grand estate was mortgaged to the absolute limit and effectively owned by a holding company. Richard was essentially a tenant in his own fake castle, living on borrowed time and my credit. He greeted us at the heavy oak doors wearing a velvet dinner jacket projecting the pristine image of a wealthy aristocrat. Blake stood right behind him, wearing the same arrogant smirk. Kendra hovered in the background, looking incredibly tense. She watched my every move, clearly trying to gauge if the toxic hallucinogenic pills she thought I swallowed the night before had finally taken their toll. The dining room was an absurd display of stolen wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a long mahogany table set with fine china. During the first two courses, Richard completely dominated the conversation. He spoke at length about his family lineage and his expensive tastes, constantly directing subtle, condescending remarks at me. He made a point to compliment my success while simultaneously attributing it to mere luck rather than skill. "You really did well for yourself, Rodney," Richard said, swirling his expensive wine. "It is always so surprising to see people from your specific background navigate the corporate world so successfully. You must have had to learn so much about refined society. It is a shame that generational class cannot be bought with real estate." I kept my face entirely blank. I let his racist microaggressions hang in the air. He was a bankrupt criminal eating caviar funded by my hard work, yet he still looked down on me because of the color of my skin. He needed to feel superior to justify his theft. I played the part of the broken man perfectly. I stared blankly at my plate, chewing slowly and occasionally muttering nonsensical responses to his insults. As the main course arrived, I knew it was time to execute my plan. I needed to leave a permanent ear inside his house. I picked up my heavy crystal glass filled to the brim with a dark, expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. I raised it slowly to my lips. Then I activated my performance. I let my hand violently tremor. My entire arm shook with exaggerated weakness. The heavy crystal glass slipped from my grip and crashed onto the sharp edge of the dining table. The glass shattered instantly, sending a massive wave of dark red wine cascading directly onto Richard's pristine white Persian rug. The reaction was immediate and highly satisfying. Richard leaped from his chair, his face flushing purple with suppressed rage. That rug alone likely cost him thousands of dollars he did not actually have to spare. "Oh my goodness," I stammered, slurring my words and dropping my voice into a pathetic, panicked register. "I am so sorry, Richard. My hands, they just stop working sometimes. I do not know what is wrong with me." I pushed my chair back and dropped heavily to my knees onto the wine-soaked rug. I grabbed my cloth napkin and began frantically scrubbing at the dark stain, acting completely disoriented. Camille played her role beautifully. She rushed to my side, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder and apologizing profusely to Richard for my failing motor skills. Blake let out a loud, disgusted sigh. "Look at him," Blake muttered to Kendra. "He belongs in a nursing home. He cannot even hold a simple glass of wine." While Richard was distracted shouting at his hired staff to bring club soda and clean towels, I took advantage of the chaos. Shielded by the long draping tablecloth and my own crouching body, I reached into the cuff of my trousers. I pulled out a micro-audio transmitter provided by Marcus. It was the size of a coin equipped with a heavy-duty adhesive backing. With a swift practiced motion, I pressed the device firmly against the underside of the thick mahogany dining table. It locked into place, completely invisible to anyone sitting in the room. I let the staff help me up, apologizing once more with a vacant, hollow stare. Richard forced a tight, agonizing smile through his gritted teeth, telling me not to worry about the rug. But his eyes were furious. We excused ourselves shortly after dessert, citing my sudden extreme exhaustion. They watched me shuffle out to the car, thoroughly convinced that my brain was rotting away exactly as they had planned. The moment the doors of my car closed and we drove past the front security gates, my trembling stopped completely. My posture straightened and the confused old man vanished. I pulled out my phone and activated the secure receiver application. The signal was crystal clear. The transmitter under Richard's dining table was working perfectly. When Camille and I returned home, we went straight to my study. I connected the audio feed to my desktop speakers. For the first hour, we only heard the clinking of dishes and the hired staff cleaning up the dining room. But then the heavy doors of the dining room clicked shut. The room was empty except for Richard, Blake, and Kendra. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. Kendra's voice came through the speakers first. "Did you see him tonight?" she asked, sounding incredibly anxious. "He is getting worse. The pills are working exactly like you said. We need to finalize the transfer tomorrow morning before he hurts himself or causes a public scene." Richard let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "Relax, Kendra. The old fool is completely compromised. Just make sure you sign the final commercial transfer deeds at the notary tomorrow. Once your signature is on that paper, the $8 million property officially moves into our holding company." Kendra murmured her agreement and said she was going up to bed. The heavy doors opened and closed again. She had left the room. Now it was just Richard and Blake. The audio feed crackled slightly as Richard poured himself another drink. "That clueless black girl is finally going to be useful," Richard sneered, his voice dripping with pure racial malice. "Can you believe she actually thinks she is going to share in this fortune?" Blake chuckled, a cruel, soulless sound. "She really believes I love her dad. She thinks we are going to move to Europe together once we drain the old man accounts." Richard slammed his glass down on the table. "Listen to me carefully, Blake. Tomorrow morning she signs the commercial deeds as his legal guardian. Once her name is on those forged documents, she takes on all the legal liability. We immediately transfer the funds into the offshore accounts Chloe set up for us. And then we kick that ungrateful ghetto trash to the curb right alongside her senile father. If the authorities ever investigate, they will only find her signature on the fraudulent transfers. She will go to federal prison, and we will be sitting on a beach with $12 million. I sat frozen in my study. The sheer magnitude of their evil was staggering. They were not just stealing my money. They were setting up my own daughter to take the fall for a massive federal crime. They hated us for our skin color, but they lusted after our wealth. Camille placed a steady hand on my shoulder, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fury. "They think they have outsmarted us," she whispered. I reached over and turned off the audio feed. A new kind of war had just presented itself. They wanted to steal an $8 million commercial property using my stolen signature tomorrow morning. It was time to show them what happens when you try to steal from a man who owns the very ground you stand on. The sharp ring of my secure private line shattered the early morning silence. I was already awake, sitting in the dim light of my study with a cup of black coffee. I knew who was calling. Arthur Holloway. My corporate litigator did not make phone calls at 6 in the morning unless a major financial earthquake had just registered on his monitors. I picked up the receiver on the first ring. "Rodney, we have a massive breach," Holloway said, his voice stripped of its usual composed cadence. "The digital signature protocol on your main server was compromised. A shell company registered in Delaware just filed a warranty deed transfer with the county clerk. They initiated a total transfer of the prime commercial acreage in the West River District. They are trying to steal your $8 million property." The sheer audacity of their move was almost impressive. Kendra had successfully mirrored my encrypted signature using that silver flash drive, and Richard had wasted absolutely no time executing his grand theft. That particular piece of land was one of the most valuable undeveloped commercial zones in the city. Richard intended to use that stolen deed as collateral to secure a massive bank loan to bail out his bankrupt aristocratic facade. "I want you to freeze the transfer immediately," Holloway demanded. "I have my team ready to file an emergency injunction with the state Supreme Court. We can lock them out before the ink dries on the county ledger and have them arrested for corporate espionage by noon." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "No, Arthur," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "Do not file any injunctions. Do not block the transfer. Let the county clerk process the deed. Let the shell company take official possession of the land." Holloway went completely silent on the other end of the line. "Rodney, you cannot be serious," he finally sputtered. "You are willingly letting them steal an $8 million asset. It is a highly aggressive maneuver. If they collateralize that land, you could spend years in civil litigation trying to untangle the mess. You do not understand the board we are playing on, Arthur," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Stopping them now is just an attempted forgery charge. They will hire expensive lawyers, claim it was a clerical error, or blame my daughter entirely. I do not want them to attempt a crime. I want them to complete it. Let them hang the albatross around their own necks. I hung up the phone. Richard thought he was playing checkers, but I was playing a game of absolute annihilation. With the fake land transfer proceeding exactly as they planned, I turned my attention to my next immediate target. Richard derived his entire false sense of superiority from the sprawling stone mansion he occupied. He used it to intimidate people, to project wealth, and to look down on my family. But Marcus had already exposed the truth. Richard did not own that estate. He was drowning in toxic debt, and the property was heavily mortgaged through a private distressed asset management firm. He was essentially a squatter in a tuxedo. I opened my encrypted laptop and contacted the primary asset manager for my blind trust. I did not want to just expose Richard. I wanted to own the very roof over his head. I instructed my financial team to immediately approach the private lending firm holding the primary note on Richard Estate. I offered to buy the entire debt portfolio for that specific property in cash, paying a premium 10% above the current market value to guarantee an instant, unresisted transaction. In the ruthless world of high finance, cash is the ultimate king. The private lending firm accepted my offer within 2 hours. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the massive transaction cleared the wire. The title, the mortgage, and the total legal authority over the stone mansion were quietly transferred to a subsidiary holding company completely controlled by my blind trust. Richard had no idea. He was busy celebrating his fraudulent land grab, completely oblivious to the fact that his worst enemy was now his direct landlord and his sole creditor. I held the absolute power to initiate foreclosure and eviction proceedings at any second. I printed the confirmation of the debt acquisition and placed it neatly on my mahogany desk. Camille walked into the study looking at the freshly printed document. "What is that?" she asked, her eyes sharp and curious. That, I replied, tapping the paper, is the eviction notice for a fake aristocrat. He invited us to his house to mock us and record my supposed mental decline. Now I own his house. We can throw him out into the street whenever we choose, but we are going to wait. We are going to let his arrogance reach its absolute peak before we pull the rug out from under him. That evening, the micro-audio transmitter I had hidden under Richard's dining table roared to life. Camille and I sat in my study listening to the unmistakable sounds of a lavish celebration. Richard had hired a private catering team. Glasses clinked constantly and loud, boisterous laughter echoed through the speakers. They were toasting to their perceived victory. "I cannot believe how easy it was," Richard boasted, his voice slightly slurred from the expensive champagne. "The county clerk processed the commercial deed transfer an hour ago. The old man's signature cleared the system without a single red flag. We hold the title to an $8 million asset and he is sitting at home drooling on his sweater." Blake laughed loudly. "You are a genius, Dad. Chloe already sent the deed over to Vanguard Horizon Bank. The commercial lending director is drawing up a $5 million cash loan against the property as we speak. We sign the final bank paperwork tomorrow afternoon and the funds hit our offshore account by Friday." "What about Kendra?" Chloe asked, her voice dripping with venomous disdain. "Is she going to be a problem at the signing tomorrow?" "Absolutely not," Richard sneered. "She is so desperate for our approval she will do whatever we say. Once the bank loan clears, we cut her loose. Let her rot with her crazy father." I watched Camille clench her fists, her knuckles turning white as she listened to them casually plot the destruction of our daughter. "Let them celebrate, Camille," I whispered, placing a hand over hers. "They are currently dancing in a minefield." Camille looked at me, a question in her eyes. "What do you mean, Rodney? Why did you let them take the West River commercial plot? Why not any of your other properties?" I smiled a cold, calculated smile. "Because Richard was too arrogant to do his due diligence," I explained. "He just looked at my portfolio, saw an $8 million price tag, and blindly stole the deed. He does not know what I actually did with that specific parcel of land 3 weeks ago." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a federal document stamped with a government seal. "The West River plot is located on a protected watershed." I continued. "Last month, I officially donated the entirety of that land to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to be converted into a highly restricted ecological preserve. The state processing is just slow to update the public registry." Camille's eyes widened in sudden realization. "That means Richard did not just steal land from you," she whispered. "Exactly," I replied. "By transferring that deed and attempting to use it as collateral for a massive bank loan, Richard and Blake are not committing a simple state-level fraud. They just forged a document claiming ownership of United States government property, and they are trying to defraud a federally insured bank with it. It is a Class A federal felony. They triggered a trap that carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The FBI handles those crimes, not local police. The trap was set perfectly. Tomorrow, they would walk into the bank thinking they were becoming millionaires. Instead, they were walking straight into a federal cage. The morning sun had barely warmed the living room when the heavy thud of the front door opening echoed through the hallway. I was sitting in my armchair reading the Financial Times. Camille was in the kitchen. Kendra had used her old emergency key. She marched into the house without knocking, projecting the false authority of a woman who believed she already owned the place. She was not alone. Right behind her was a tall, thin white man with slicked back hair and a tailored gray suit. He carried a thick leather briefcase and wore the arrogant expression of someone who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. "Dad," Kendra said, her voice dripping with that sickening artificial sweetness. "I brought a friend to see you. This is Dr. Mercer. He is a highly respected cognitive specialist. We are just going to do a quick standard evaluation to make sure you are doing okay." I folded my newspaper slowly and placed it on the side table. I looked at Mercer. He did not look like a doctor who cared about his patients. He looked like a mercenary hired to do a dirty job. "Good morning," Mr. Rodney Mercer said, pulling a pen from his breast pocket. "Kendra has expressed some deep concerns about your recent behavior. I am here to conduct a basic psychological evaluation. I need you to answer a few simple questions." He did not wait for my permission. He pulled a printed test from his briefcase and clicked his pen. "Let us start with the basics. Can you tell me what year it is? Can you tell me the name of the current president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" Kendra hovered behind him, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was expecting me to slur my words, to stumble, and to show the devastating effects of the hallucinogenic pills she had tried to feed me 2 nights ago. She expected a broken, confused old man. I did not say a word. I just sat there looking at Mercer with eyes as cold and hard as granite. Mr. Rodney Mercer prompted, his tone growing condescending. "If you cannot answer these basic questions, I will have to note that in my official medical report. It is very important that you cooperate for your own safety." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I do not need to count backward from 100, Dr. Mercer," I said, my voice low and completely steady. "But I can recite some other numbers for you. Let us start with 2019. That was the year the State Medical Board of Illinois permanently revoked your psychiatric license for accepting bribes from wealthy families to falsely declare their elderly relatives incompetent." Mercer froze. His pen hovered awkwardly over his clipboard. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden sickening pale hue. I reached over to the side table and picked up a thick manila folder that Marcus, my private investigator, had delivered just an hour earlier. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Let us move on to some more numbers," I continued, never breaking eye contact. $50,000. That is the exact amount of cash Richard wired to your offshore account 3 days ago to produce a fraudulent medical evaluation today. You are not here to assess my cognitive function. You are here to provide the final piece of fabricated evidence Richard needs to steal my estate." Mercer swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing visibly. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he stammered, taking a full step back. "I am a licensed professional." "You are a disgraced fraud," I corrected him, my voice echoing off the walls. "And you made a catastrophic mistake walking into my home. You see, Dr. Mercer, attempting to defraud a senior citizen is a state crime. But conspiring across state lines using wire transfers to forge medical documents to steal commercial real estate is a federal racketeering charge. My corporate lawyers have already prepared a comprehensive dossier on your current illegal activities. If you do not walk out of my house this exact second and disappear from this state, I will personally hand this folder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You will not just lose your fake practice. You will spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Mercer looked at the folder on the table and then looked at me. He saw no confusion in my eyes. He saw the ruthless corporate titan who had destroyed men twice his size. Without uttering a single word, Mercer shoved his papers back into his briefcase. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted out the front door, leaving it wide open behind him. He did not even look back at Kendra. Kendra stood frozen in the middle of the living room. Her hired gun had just fled in sheer terror, and her entire narrative of my mental decline was crumbling before her very eyes. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Before she could try to spin another web of lies, Camille walked out of the kitchen. My wife moved with a quiet, terrifying grace. She stopped directly in front of Kendra. "You brought a criminal into our home," Camille said, her voice vibrating with a cold, controlled fury. "You tried to drug your own father. You conspired with people who look down on us, who mock our skin color and our heritage, just so you could steal the empire this man built with his bare hands." Kendra dropped the fake innocent act, her face contorted into an ugly, hateful sneer. "You shut up," she spat at Camille. "You are not my mother. You do not get to tell me what to do." The crack of the slap echoed like a gunshot. Camille struck Kendra across the face with a force that sent my daughter stumbling backward. Kendra clutched her stinging cheek, her eyes wide with absolute shock. "Your biological mother died when you were just a child," Camille stated, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. I stepped in. "I raised you since you were 10 years old. I braided your hair. I wiped your tears. I loved you as my own flesh and blood. And this is how you repay us. You sell your father out to a family of bankrupt racist con artists who despise your very existence. You are a disgrace to this family, and you are a disgrace to yourself." Kendra glared at us, her eyes burning with pure venom. The mask was completely gone now. There was no more pretending. "You think you have won because you scared off one fake doctor?" Kendra hissed, stepping toward the door. "You have no idea what Richard is capable of. He will take everything from you. We are going to bleed you dry and leave you with nothing. You hear me? Nothing." She spun around and stormed out of the house, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the framed pictures on the wall rattled. Camille stood tall, her chest heaving slightly but her expression resolute. She turned to me. I let out a slow, heavy breath. "We just backed them into a corner, Camille," I said, staring at the closed door. "They know I am completely lucid, and they know we are onto their scheme. The element of surprise is gone." Camille nodded, her jaw set. "Which means they are going to panic," she replied. "They are running out of time and money. They will not wait for the bank loan to process smoothly anymore. They are going to accelerate their entire timeline. Cornered animals are the most dangerous." I warned, walking over to lock the deadbolt. "We need to be ready for whatever they throw at us tomorrow." I sat back down at my heavy mahogany desk and opened the encrypted tablet Marcus had left behind. The physical confrontation with Kendra and her fake doctor had been a necessary display of force, but physical force was never my preferred method of destroying an opponent. I have always preferred psychological warfare. If you want to completely dismantle a criminal conspiracy, you do not attack the fortress from the outside with blunt weapons. You plant a highly explosive bomb inside the walls and let the inhabitants detonate it themselves. I clicked through the high-resolution surveillance photos Marcus had taken of Blake and his mistress Chloe. There was one specific image that caught my eye and held my attention. It was a crystal-clear shot of Chloe leaving a luxury downtown boutique holding a very distinct limited-edition crimson leather handbag. It was the kind of extravagant accessory that cost more than a reliable luxury sedan. I knew exactly how that crimson bag was purchased. Before I had David freeze all the supplementary accounts, Blake had maxed out his joint credit line to buy that exact item. Kendra was completely oblivious to all of this. She actually thought Blake was spending his days in intense strategy meetings with Richard, working hard to secure their financial future. She had absolutely no idea he was spending my hard-earned money on his father legal secretary. I opened a secure anonymous messaging application on my encrypted laptop. I attached the photograph of Chloe holding the bright crimson handbag. I did not write a long emotional paragraph. I did not hurl angry insults or make any obvious threats. I simply typed a single sharp sentence. "Ask your husband how much he spent on Chloe last Tuesday." I hit send and routed the message directly to Kendra's personal cell phone, masking the origin point completely. I closed the laptop and took a slow sip of my dark coffee. Camille watched me from the doorway, a knowing and dangerous smile playing on her lips. "You planted the seed," she said softly, her voice echoing in the quiet study. I nodded my head. "Greed and paranoia are a highly volatile combination," I replied. When you build a partnership entirely on lies and stolen money, there is absolutely no loyalty holding it together. Kendra thinks she is the brilliant mastermind of this operation. She is about to find out she is just the sacrificial lamb waiting for the slaughter. Now we sit back and watch the wolves turn on each other. Thanks to the digital tracking software Marcus had discreetly attached to the fake mirroring program Kendra used on my computer, we were able to monitor her digital footprint in real time. We watched her screen activity mirror directly onto my secure monitor in the study. The moment the anonymous message hit her phone, her reaction was immediate and chaotic. She did not confront Blake face to face. She did not calmly ask him about the crimson bag. Instead, her sheer paranoia took over exactly as I had calculated it would. We watched her cursor fly frantically across the screen as she hastily logged into the joint banking portal. She pulled up the transaction history for the supplementary credit card. This was the very same credit card I had ordered David to flag and cancel just hours prior. Her eyes must have been burning with rage as she scanned the itemized list of expenditures. There it was in plain black and white text. A $25,000 charge at an exclusive designer boutique downtown, perfectly matching the date and time of the surveillance photo. But she did not stop there. Once the seed of doubt was planted, it grew into a suffocating, toxic vine. She kept scrolling back through months of private statements. She found exorbitant charges for 5-star hotel rooms in the financial district. She found receipts for expensive jewelry stores and high-end romantic dinners. All of these charges were billed on the exact nights Blake had claimed he was working late at his father's estate reviewing legal documents. I listened through the audio feed we had managed to intercept from her mobile device microphone. I heard her breathing grow ragged and incredibly heavy. I heard the sharp, violent sound of a glass shattering against a hard wall. The ultimate betrayal had finally pierced her thick armor of arrogance and entitlement. The white knight she had abandoned her family for was nothing but a cheap fraud who was using her stolen inheritance to fund his illicit affair. She finally realized that she was not an equal partner in their grand aristocratic scheme. She was simply a temporary tool meant to be discarded. The moment they secured the $8 million bank loan using my commercial property, Blake and Richard were going to take the money and leave her completely empty-handed. They were going to let her take the fall for the forged medical documents and the wire fraud while Blake sailed off with his mistress. A normal person realizing they had been used and betrayed by their spouse might have felt a shred of genuine remorse. A daughter with even a fraction of a working conscience might have driven straight back to my house, fallen to her knees, and begged for forgiveness for participating in such an evil conspiracy. But Kendra had long ago surrendered her moral compass to the altar of greed. She did not feel any remorse for what she had done to me. She only felt a violent, all-consuming rage toward the men who were trying to cheat her out of her payday. Through the intercepted audio feed, I heard her pacing the floor of her bedroom, muttering furiously to herself. She was not planning a tearful apology to her father. She was planning a ruthless counterstrike against her own husband. "I have my name on the guardianship papers," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling with manic energy. "I am the one signing the commercial deeds. It is my signature on the bank loan. They need me to finalize the transaction." The audio feed picked up the rapid sound of her frantically typing on her laptop keyboard. Marcus tracked her keystrokes as she navigated the dark web, seeking out an offshore financial facilitator. She was setting up a completely hidden, untraceable bank account in the Cayman Islands under a shell corporation registered solely in her name. Her plan was as desperate as it was diabolical. She knew Richard and Blake expected her to sign the final loan documents at the bank tomorrow, transferring the $8 million payout into their joint holding account. She was going to smile, play the obedient wife, and sign every single piece of paper they put in front of her. But she had just downloaded a digital routing override protocol. The moment the bank manager initiated the wire transfer, she intended to hijack the routing numbers and divert the entire $8 million directly into her newly created offshore account. She was going to steal the stolen money. She planned to let the transfer clear, walk out of the bank under the guise of going to the restroom, and disappear entirely. She would board a private flight out of the country before Richard and Blake even checked their balance. She was going to leave her husband and her father-in-law holding a massive fraudulent commercial loan on a piece of property they did not actually own, while she vanished into the sunset as a multi-millionaire. I sat back and looked at Camille. The sheer venom of their internal betrayal was astonishing. Their greed was a cancer that was rapidly eating them alive from the inside out. They were no longer a united front working to destroy me. They were a pack of starving wolves turning their teeth on each other. Kendra thought she was executing the perfect double cross. She thought she was going to outsmart the men who tried to outsmart me. But she was completely oblivious to the fact that the $8 million property she was trying to hijack was already federal land. She was not stealing a fortune. She was just fighting for the absolute privilege of holding the smoking gun when the federal agents finally kicked the door down. The sun had barely crested the horizon when a violent pounding rattled our solid oak front door. It was not the polite knock of a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was the aggressive, authoritative hammering of someone demanding immediate entry. I glanced at the security monitors on my desk. Standing on my front porch was a uniformed city police officer. He was a broad-shouldered white man with a thick mustache, resting his hand casually on his heavy-duty belt. He looked impatient and highly annoyed. I walked down the hallway, my posture straight and my expression carefully blank. Camille stood at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, watching silently. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. The officer did not bother with a polite greeting. He immediately shoved a crumpled piece of paper toward my chest. "Are you Rodney?" he demanded, his voice loud and artificially stern. I looked at the name tag pinned to his uniform. Officer Briggs. "Yes, I am," I replied, keeping my hands firmly at my sides and refusing to take the paper. Briggs puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "I am here executing a court-mandated asset seizure," he barked, stepping forward as if he intended to push right past me into my foyer. "We received a verified report from your legal guardian stating that your severe mental decline makes you a danger to your own financial security. I have a seizure order here to confiscate all high-value electronics, secure financial documents, and any portable assets of significant worth to be placed in protective custody." The sheer brazen corruption of the move was staggering. Richard and Blake were panicking because their bank transfer had not cleared yet, and they were bleeding cash. They needed immediate liquid assets to pay off their violent private lenders, and they wanted to blind me by taking my computers and servers. They had clearly bribed a dirty local cop with the promise of a massive payout to act as their personal armed collection agent. A legitimate asset seizure requires a superior court judge signature and the presence of a court-appointed bailiff. Briggs was holding a piece of paper that looked like it had been printed in Richard's home office less than an hour ago. He expected me to be a terrified old man intimidated by a shiny badge and a loud voice. He expected me to step aside and let him rob my house blind under the color of law. "You are stepping onto private property, Officer Briggs," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "And you are attempting to execute a fraudulent warrant. Step back from my threshold." Briggs' face flushed a deep, angry red. "Listen here, old man," he growled, reaching for his handcuffs. "I am not asking for your permission. You are legally incompetent, and I am entering this premises right now. If you resist, I will place you under arrest for assaulting an officer." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I did not dial a local defense attorney. I did not call the precinct watch commander. When you are fighting a corrupt system, you do not appeal to the middle management. You go straight to the absolute top of the food chain. I tapped a contact on my private favorites list and hit the video call icon. The phone rang exactly once before the screen connected. The face of Robert Hayes filled the display. Robert was the current state attorney general. He was also a man whose initial run for public office 15 years ago was almost entirely funded by my commercial real estate political action committee. We had played golf together for a decade and trusted each other implicitly. "Good morning, Rodney." Robert said, his voice crisp and professional, though he looked slightly surprised by the early video call. "What can I do for you, my friend?" "Good morning, Robert," I replied, holding the phone up so the camera captured both my face and the aggressive stance of Officer Briggs standing on my porch. "I am currently being threatened with false arrest by a local patrolman named Briggs. He is standing at my front door, attempting to execute a blatantly forged asset seizure order based on fraudulent medical documents. I need you to clarify the legal statutes regarding armed home invasion by a corrupt municipal officer." The color vanished from Officer Briggs' face so fast he looked like he might actually faint. He recognized the state attorney general immediately. His arrogant posture collapsed and his hand fell away from his duty belt as if the leather had suddenly caught fire. "Officer Briggs." Robert's voice cut through the phone speaker sharp and carrying the full devastating weight of the highest law enforcement office in the state. "Hold that warrant up to the camera right now so I can read the issuing judge signature." Briggs stood completely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He knew exactly what he was holding. He knew it was a fake piece of paper provided by a bankrupt ex-banker. To present it to the Attorney General was an immediate federal crime. Sir Briggs stammered, sweating profusely in the cool morning air. This might be a misunderstanding. I was just following a dispatch tip regarding a vulnerable senior citizen. I did not mean to overstep. There is no misunderstanding, Robert replied coldly. You are attempting an illegal seizure at the home of one of the most prominent real estate developers in this state. Read me your badge number immediately, Briggs. I am dispatching the state anti-corruption unit to your precinct within the hour. Do not leave your jurisdiction. Briggs did not wait to hear another word. Sheer panic took over his entire body. He dropped the fake warrant on my porch, spun around, and practically sprinted to his patrol car. He peeled out of my neighborhood, breaking 3 traffic laws in the process, desperate to get away. I picked up the discarded fake warrant and thanked Robert, ending the call. The dirty cop had been neutralized without a single lawyer entering a courtroom. With the immediate physical threat to my home completely eliminated, I walked back into my study and sat down at my desk. It was time to deal a devastating psychological blow to the mastermind pulling the strings. Richard was sitting in his leased mansion, completely unaware that his dirty cop had just fled in terror. He was likely waiting by the phone for Briggs to call and confirm that my secure servers and financial documents had been successfully seized. Instead, he was about to receive a completely different kind of delivery. I opened the application connected to the micro-audio transmitter hidden beneath his dining room table. The audio feed crackled to life. I could hear Richard pacing back and forth across the hardwood floors. He was muttering impatiently to Blake. He should have been there by now. Richard snapped, his voice tight with anxiety. Briggs promised he would clear out the old man computers and whatever jewelry was in the safe. We need something we can pawn this afternoon. The offshore account setup fees are draining my last bit of liquid cash. Just relax, Dad, Blake replied, sounding equally nervous. Briggs knows what he is doing. The old man will be so terrified of getting arrested he will hand over everything. Suddenly, a heavy and persistent knocking echoed through the audio feed. It was not coming from my front door this time. It was coming from Richard's grand entryway. I smiled, listening intently. The front doors creaked open. Are you Richard? A stern, unfamiliar voice asked. Yes, I am Richard, answered, adopting his usual haughty, aristocratic tone. What is the meaning of this interruption? You are trespassing on private property. I am a court-appointed process server, the voice stated flatly. I am serving you with an immediate notice of default and a 48-hour eviction mandate. Richard let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You are completely out of your mind, he scoffed. I am the owner of this estate. I have a standing injunction against my primary lenders. My lawyers have stalled the foreclosure. You have no legal right to be here. Your previous lender sold your entire debt portfolio yesterday morning. The server explained, his tone devoid of any sympathy. The new primary lien holder is a private holding company. They have invoked the absolute default clause in your original contract due to multiple documented instances of financial fraud and failure to maintain the property taxes. Your injunction is entirely void against the new owner. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises before county sheriffs arrive to forcibly remove you and all your belongings. Have a nice day, sir. The heavy doors shut, leaving a ringing silence in Richard's hallway. The audio transmitter picked up the sound of paper rustling as Richard frantically read through the legal documents. His arrogant facade shattered instantly. What does it say? Blake asked, his voice trembling with sudden dread. It is an eviction order, Richard whispered, his breath hitching in his chest. They sold my debt. A private holding company bought the entire mortgage in cash yesterday. They are kicking us out. We have nowhere to go. Who bought it? Blake demanded. Who has that kind of liquid cash just sitting around? Richard slammed his fist against the wall. I do not know, he roared, his voice echoing with absolute panic. The holding company is anonymous. It is a blind trust. Someone with massive capital is targeting us specifically. We are losing the house, Blake. We are going to be homeless by the weekend. I leaned back in my leather chair and took a deep, satisfying breath. Richard was a man who defined his entire worth by the walls that surrounded him and the address on his mail. Stripping him of his fake castle was the ultimate humiliation. He was terrified, believing some ruthless, faceless corporate predator was dismantling his life. He had no idea that the predator was the very same black man he had mocked just 24 hours earlier at his own dining table. The walls were closing in on him fast. The eviction notice would force him to act with reckless desperation. He needed the $8 million from my commercial property transfer more than ever now. He had to finalize the bank loan tomorrow or face total public ruin. He was rushing blindly into the final stage of my trap, and he was dragging his son and my traitorous daughter right into the fire with him. I kept the audio feed running through my desktop speakers. The sheer panic in Richard House over the impending eviction was suddenly drowned out by the sound of heavy double doors being thrown violently open. Kendra had arrived. She did not bother with pleasantries or her usual attempt to act like a refined society wife. She marched straight into Richard's home office like a hurricane of pure rage. "You lying, cheating piece of garbage," she screamed, her voice echoing sharply through the hidden microphone. I heard the sharp smack of a thick stack of papers hitting a wooden desk. "I know exactly where you were last Tuesday, Blake. I know exactly who Chloe is. And I know you spent $25,000 of my father money on a crimson leather handbag for your mistress." Blake stammered, completely caught off guard. "Kendra, honey, let me explain." He pleaded, his voice weak and pathetic. But Kendra was operating on pure adrenaline and betrayal. "Do not call me honey," she shrieked. "You maxed out the joint credit line. You took the money I secured for us, and you spent it on the legal secretary. You both played me for an absolute fool." I listened to the chaotic, overlapping voices. Blake tried to deny the allegations, but Kendra had the bank statements. She had the dates, the times, and the exact amounts. She had the photograph I anonymously sent her. The facade of their perfect aristocratic marriage was instantly reduced to rubble. Kendra thought her righteous anger would make them apologize. She thought she still held a position of power because they needed her signature to finalize the massive bank loan tomorrow. But she was about to learn a brutal lesson about the people she had chosen over her own blood. Richard had finally had enough. "Shut your mouth right now," Richard roared, his voice booming with terrifying authority. The aristocratic charm vanished entirely, revealing the vicious, racist thug underneath. "You actually thought you were an equal partner in this family," he sneered. "You are nothing but a convenient signature, Kendra. You are a biological tool we needed to access the old man vault. Do not stand in my office and demand respect. You do not belong in our world, and you never did. You are just a greedy little girl who sold out her own father for a taste of country club luxury." Kendra gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. "You cannot talk to me like that," she cried. "I will not sign the commercial loan documents tomorrow. I am walking away from this entire deal. You will not get a single penny." Richard let out a dark, menacing laugh. "You are not walking away from anything," he threatened, his tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You already signed the preliminary transfer deeds. You downloaded the forged signature program. Your name is on the fraudulent medical affidavits. If you back out now, Blake and I will hand all that evidence directly to the authorities. We will claim you masterminded the entire scheme. We will leave you holding millions of dollars in forged debt, and you will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison cell. Now get out of my house and be at the bank tomorrow morning, or I will ruin you." The audio feed picked up the sound of Kendra running out of the room, sobbing hysterically. Less than 20 minutes later, the security cameras outside my house chimed. Kendra's car swerved into my driveway. She practically fell out of the driver's seat and ran to my front porch, pounding on the door. I walked to the foyer and opened the door. Kendra looked absolutely pathetic. Her expensive makeup was smeared with tears, and her designer clothes were wrinkled. "Dad," she sobbed, collapsing to her knees on my porch. "You have to help me. I made a terrible mistake. Blake and Richard lied to me. They manipulated me into helping them. They are threatening to frame me for fraud. Please, Dad, I need $2 million to pay for a defense attorney and disappear. Just write me a check, and I will never bother you again. I am a victim. Dad, please." I looked down at the woman kneeling on my porch. She was not crying because she regretted betraying me. She was crying because she had been outsmarted by her own accomplices and wanted me to foot the bill for her escape. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of sympathy. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen and held it up so she could clearly hear the audio file. It was the recording from my hidden study camera the night she brought me chamomile tea. Her own voice played back crystal clear. "Drink this and take your pills. You will feel much better in the morning." I stopped the recording and stared into her wide, terrified eyes. "You did not come here for salvation, Kendra. I said, my voice as cold as absolute zero. You came here to chemically lobotomize me. You swapped my blood pressure medication with military-grade hallucinogens. You plugged a flash drive into my computer to steal my signature. You are not a victim. You are a predator who just realized she is locked in a cage with bigger predators. Dad, please, she begged, reaching for my pant leg. I stepped back, pulling my leg out of her grasp. I do not have a daughter, I stated firmly, and I do not finance terrorists. You chose your new family. Now go back and face them. I grabbed the heavy brass handle and slammed the solid oak door shut. The loud thud echoed with absolute finality. I locked the deadbolt and walked back to my study, leaving her wailing on the front porch. Camille was standing by my desk, her face unreadable, but her eyes fierce. She made her choice, Camille said softly. I nodded. And now she has to live with the consequences. But the game was rapidly shifting from corporate espionage to sheer physical danger. I looked at the security monitors. Kendra stumbled back to her car. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking violently. I turned up the volume on the external audio receivers mounted above the porch. She had called Richard. It is over, Kendra screamed into the phone. The old man knows everything. He has recordings of me swapping the pills. He knows about the forged signature. He is not going to let the bank transfer happen tomorrow. We are completely ruined. I heard Richard's voice barking through her phone speaker, though the words were muffled. Then the tone of the conversation changed. Kendra stopped crying. Her eyes widened in horror. Oh, no, she whispered. You cannot do that. He is still my father. Richard yelled something else entirely ruthless. Kendra dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and sped out of the driveway, driving like a maniac. I turned to Camille, my instincts flaring with sudden, intense alarm. Richard just realized the legal avenues are completely dead, I said, my mind racing through the tactical possibilities. The bank fraud will fail. The eviction is looming. They are broke desperate and facing decades in prison. Camille gripped the edge of the desk. What are they going to do? She asked. I locked eyes with my wife. When white-collar criminals realize the pen and paper will no longer save them, they resort to the only option they have left, I explained. They are going to use physical violence. Richard knows the only way to access my wealth now is through direct inheritance. He thinks if I die tonight, Kendra will inherit the estate by default, and he can force her to hand it over. They are going to try to kill us, Camille. We need to prepare for a physical strike. The night air was thick with tension. I stood by the large bay window of my study, watching the quiet suburban street outside. I knew Richard had crossed the point of no return. When a desperate man is staring down the barrel of homelessness and a lengthy federal prison sentence, he stops caring about the law entirely. He only cares about immediate survival. I had driven my silver luxury sport utility vehicle for the past 3 years. It was highly recognizable in our quiet neighborhood with its custom-tinted windows and polished chrome grille. Exactly 2 hours after Kendra fled my front porch, the violence we anticipated finally arrived. It did not happen at my front door. It happened 3 miles away at the blind intersection of Oak Bridge and 7th Avenue. The security feed from the municipal traffic cameras provided directly to my laptop by Marcus captured the entire horrifying sequence in high definition. My silver vehicle was waiting at a red light. The streets were relatively empty due to the late hour. Suddenly, a massive black pickup truck with no license plates accelerated out of the deep shadows of a side alley. It did not swerve or hesitate. It did not hit the brakes. The driver floored the gas pedal, aiming the reinforced steel bumper directly at the driver's side door of my vehicle. The impact was deafening, even through the silent digital video feed. The sheer kinetic force of the collision lifted the 2-ton silver vehicle completely off the asphalt, spinning it through the intersection in a violent shower of shattered glass and twisted metal. The sport utility vehicle slammed into a concrete traffic light pole, crumbling the entire front chassis like a discarded soda can. The black pickup truck immediately reversed gears, its front end smoking heavily, and sped away into the dark night. It was a textbook professional hit. There were no skid marks on the pavement. There was no attempt to minimize the devastating damage. The objective was absolute kinetic destruction. Anyone sitting in the driver's seat of that silver vehicle was meant to be crushed instantly. Richard had ordered a cold-blooded assassination. He wanted me dead tonight so Kendra could inherit the estate by morning. He thought he had just solved all his financial problems with a single brutal vehicular homicide. But Richard was playing a game he could not possibly win because I was always 3 steps ahead of his arrogance. Just 30 minutes after Kendra left my house, Marcus had called me on my secure encrypted line. His network of informants in the local criminal underworld had intercepted digital chatter about a high-paying rush job. Richard had liquidated the very last of his hidden cash reserves to hire 2 violent local enforcers. The primary target was my silver vehicle. Marcus told me they were tracking the global positioning system signal from my car, assuming I would be behind the wheel driving to a safe location. I did not panic, and I certainly did not call the local police. I simply executed a tactical misdirection. I told Marcus to leave the vehicle exactly where it was parked downtown, but I made sure I was nowhere near it. Instead, I orchestrated a completely different kind of delivery. Richard Lidd, defense attorney, a sleazy corporate lawyer named Vance, who had been actively helping Chloe forge the real estate documents, had been demanding his final payment all week. I used a burner phone and a voice modulation application to pose as Richard's executive assistant. I contacted Vance and told him Richard had left a briefcase containing $50,000 in cash in the trunk of my silver vehicle, which was currently parked outside a downtown restaurant. I gave Vance the remote access code and told him to drive the vehicle to a secure location to retrieve his illicit payment. Vance was so incredibly greedy and eager to get his dirty money that he never stopped to question the logistics of the request. He eagerly located my vehicle, unlocked it, and climbed right into the driver's seat. He was the one sitting behind the wheel at Oak Bridge and 7th Avenue when Richard hired hitmen completely obliterated the car. Richard had paid mercenaries a fortune to execute me, but he ended up ordering a violent hit on his own legal counsel. Emergency responders pulled Vance from the wreckage alive but severely injured. He was rushed to the intensive care unit with multiple fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and a shattered collarbone. When Vance woke up in the hospital and realized his own client had accidentally orchestrated his attempted murder, he was going to sing like a canary to the federal authorities. Richard had just eliminated his only legal defense and handed the prosecution their star witness. The game had fundamentally changed. This was no longer just a matter of white-collar fraud, unauthorized credit card charges, or forged medical documents. We had officially crossed the threshold into conspiracy to commit murder and hiring a contract killer. Richard and Blake had upgraded their desperate crimes to capital offenses. Camille watched the traffic camera footage looping on my monitor with a look of absolute disgust. "They actually tried to murder you," she said, her voice completely devoid of fear, but heavy with righteous anger. "They sent a truck to crush you because they could not steal your signature fast enough." I nodded slowly, closing the laptop. "Yes," I replied softly. "And that is the exact level of desperation we need for tomorrow morning." Arthur Holloway arrived at my house shortly after midnight. He brought a team of 3 highly specialized corporate attorneys. They set up a mobile command center in my dining room, laying out thick stacks of legal documents, federal statutes, and the digital evidence Marcus had meticulously compiled. We had Richard entirely boxed in from every conceivable angle. We had the wire fraud, the fake medical affidavits, the forged commercial deed, the bank fraud, and now we had the intercepted communications linking him directly to a vehicular assassination attempt. Arthur wanted to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately and have tactical teams raid Richard Least's mansion before dawn to arrest them all in their beds. I refused. I shook my head and placed my hand flat on the dining table. "No, Arthur," I said with absolute finality. "Arresting them in the middle of the night in their pajamas is far too quiet. It gives them the opportunity to play the victim, to claim misunderstandings, or to lawyer up in private. Richard has spent the last 5 years looking down on me and my family. He treated me like a second-class citizen while quietly attempting to steal the wealth I built from the ground up. He thought he could outsmart me because he believed his race and his fake aristocratic pedigree made him inherently superior. I want his destruction to be as public and humiliating as humanly possible." Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Richard, Blake, and Kendra are scheduled to meet the regional director of Vanguard Horizon Bank at the downtown notary office. They firmly believe they are going to finalize the $8 million commercial loan using my stolen property deed. They think I am dead in a car crash. They think they have won the ultimate prize and secured their fraudulent future. We are going to let them walk right into that pristine glass office. We are going to let them sit down in their expensive tailored suits. We are going to let them hold the pen. And then we are going to walk through those doors and strip them of their freedom, their dignity, and their entire fake legacy in front of the most powerful financial executives in the city. The final net was set. The wolves were marching directly toward the slaughterhouse. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown executive notary office. It was a pristine glass and steel room designed specifically for high-level wealth transfers. Richard walked through the double doors wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who believed he had just successfully committed the perfect murder. He firmly believed my silver vehicle was currently a twisted pile of metal in a police impound lot, and he thought I was lying dead inside a local morgue. Blake strutted right beside him wearing his usual arrogant smirk, completely oblivious to the fact that his own wife was actively plotting to destroy his entire future. Kendra walked a few steps behind them. She was dressed in a conservative beige dress with her hair pulled back tightly. To the outside observer, they looked like the perfect wealthy family conducting routine financial business. But beneath their polished veneer, they were a ticking time bomb of mutual hatred and deception. Just 12 hours ago, Richard had viciously threatened to frame Kendra for federal fraud, and Kendra had screamed at Blake for spending my stolen money on his mistress. Now they were forced to sit next to each other at a massive mahogany conference table, smiling for the bank executives as if they were a unified, loyal front. Richard was practically vibrating with immense greed. He desperately needed this $8 million commercial loan to clear today to save his leased mansion from the eviction notice I had anonymously served him. He shook hands with the senior notary and greeted the regional director of Vanguard Horizon Bank with a booming, hearty laugh. They all sat down together, the atmosphere thick with the smell of expensive cologne and desperate anticipation. Kendra kept her eyes fixed firmly on the polished wood of the table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but I knew exactly what was running through her treacherous mind. She was waiting for the exact moment the funds were released, so she could use her digital routing override to hijack the $8 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. They were all sitting in a circle of lies, each one believing they were the smartest person in the room. They had no idea they were simply actors on a stage I had meticulously built for their ultimate public execution. The regional director of Vanguard Horizon Bank, a stern man named Mr. Sterling, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the thick leather-bound folder resting in the center of the table. "Good morning, everyone," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the quiet professional room. "We are here to finalize the collateralized commercial loan of $8 million against the West River District property. The funds have been fully approved by our underwriting department and are currently sitting in escrow awaiting your final signature authorization." Richard leaned forward, his eyes locked onto the folder like a starving predator cornering its prey. "Excellent," Richard said, smoothing his silk tie with feigned aristocratic grace. "We are very eager to conclude this transaction and move forward with our development initiatives." Sterling pulled a thick stack of heavily watermarked documents from the folder and placed them directly in front of Kendra. "As the court-appointed legal guardian with full financial power of attorney, we need your signature on these final security agreements," Sterling explained, handing her a heavy gold fountain pen. "By signing these pages, you legally attest that the property is free of any undisclosed encumbrances, and you authorize the immediate disbursement of the $8 million into your designated joint holding account." Kendra reached out and took the gold pen. Her hand was trembling so violently she had to press her other hand against her wrist to steady her fingers. She was staring at the blank signature line, knowing that the moment the ink touched the paper, she was committing a massive, irreversible federal crime. She was authorizing a loan against a stolen property using a forged digital signature. Richard cleared his throat, issuing a sharp warning sound. "Go ahead, Kendra." Richard urged, his voice dripping with fake encouragement that completely masked a lethal underlying threat. "Sign the paper so we can finish your father business." Kendra swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down the side of her neck. She pressed the gold nib of the pen against the thick premium paper. The scratch of the metal tip was the only sound in the room as she carefully forged the signature that would forever seal her fate. She signed the primary loan agreement, the collateral waiver, and the final disbursement authorization. She pushed the heavy documents back across the mahogany table towards Sterling. The bank director reviewed the signatures, carefully matching them against the digital files on his screen. "Everything appears to be in perfect order," Sterling announced, closing the folder with a sharp, satisfying snap. "I will initiate the wire transfer sequence right now. The funds should hit your holding account within the next 2 minutes." Richard let out a long, shaky breath of absolute relief. Blake grinned, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. They truly thought they had crossed the finish line and secured their stolen fortune. Sterling reached for his secure laptop to input the final authorization codes for the $8 million wire transfer. His index finger was literally hovering over the enter key. At that exact second, the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive conference room swung open with such explosive force they slammed against the interior walls. The sharp, violent crack echoed like a gunshot, stopping Sterling dead in his tracks. I walked into the room. I was not wearing my usual comfortable sweater or acting like a frail senior citizen. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit I had custom tailored in London, and I carried the absolute unyielding posture of a man who owned the entire building. Camille walked proudly beside me, radiating fierce elegance in a structured navy dress. Flanking us were Arthur Holloway and three of the most feared elite corporate litigators in the state, all carrying thick black briefcases. My legal team immediately fanned out across the room, blocking the exit doors and establishing absolute control over the environment. The reaction in the room was absolute cinematic perfection. Richard's eyes bulged out of his head so far I thought they might actually burst from their sockets. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet chalk. He clutched the edge of the mahogany table, gasping for air, as if the oxygen had just been completely sucked out of the room. He was staring at a ghost. He was staring at the very man he paid $50,000 to have crushed to death in a car crash last night. Blake leaped out of his leather chair, knocking it over backwards as his mouth hung open in sheer, dumbfounded terror. Kendra let out a high-pitched, stifled scream, pressing both hands over her mouth as she stared at me in pure horror. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice booming with cold, terrifying authority. "Please step away from that keyboard, Mr. Sterling. That wire transfer is officially canceled." Sterling looked completely bewildered, peering over his glasses. "Mr. Rodney," he stammered, standing up from his desk, "we were told your medical condition prevented you." I held up my hand, silencing the bank director instantly. "You were told a series of elaborate criminal lies by a bankrupt fraud," I stated, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the center of the table. "I am not legally incompetent. I am not under any medical guardianship. And I am most certainly not dead in a car crash on 7th Avenue. I stopped directly across from Richard. He was shaking uncontrollably, his aristocratic facade completely obliterated by pure primal fear. "Hello, Richard," I said, offering a chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. "You look very surprised to see me. Did you really think hiring 2 cheap local thugs to ram a truck into my silver car would solve your financial problems? You should really check who is sitting in the driver's seat before you order a professional hit." Richard let out a strangled wheezing noise, clutching his chest. The legal massacre had officially begun, and I was about to dissect their entire criminal empire piece by piece in front of everyone. Richard's chest heaved as his initial shock rapidly mutated into cornered panic. He slammed both of his hands flat onto the polished mahogany table, creating a loud smack that made Mr. Sterling flinch. "Security," he bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and desperate authority. "Call building security immediately. This man is suffering from a severe psychotic break." Richard pointed a violently trembling finger directly at my face. He turned to the bank director, desperately trying to salvage his crumbling facade by appealing to Sterling as a fellow corporate executive. "Do not listen to a single word he says, Sterling. The man is completely insane. He is suffering from aggressive advanced dementia. The car crash he is babbling about is a paranoid hallucination. He must have wandered away from his caregivers. We have the court-mandated medical power of attorney sitting right in front of you. He is legally incompetent." Blake quickly jumped in to support his father, wiping a thick layer of sweat from his forehead. "Yes," Blake stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. "He is deeply unwell. We were just trying to protect his assets before he destroys his own legacy. Please, Sterling, you have to finalize the wire transfer so we can secure the estate and get him the psychiatric help he clearly needs right now." Richard glared at me, his eyes burning with a hateful, desperate venom. He tried to project the image of a burdened aristocratic patriarch dealing with a tragic family crisis. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Rodney." Richard sneered, stepping forward as if to intimidate me. "Barging into a private financial institution and making a scene. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing your daughter. You belong in a locked ward." I stood perfectly still, letting his pathetic tirade wash over me. The sheer audacity of his performance was almost comical. He was standing in a room surrounded by elite corporate litigators, screaming that I was the one who had lost my mind. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic energy. I simply waited for him to completely exhaust his lungs. "Are you quite finished, Richard?" I asked, my tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "Because your performance is beginning to bore me." I did not need to shout to command the room. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. Arthur Holloway stepped forward instantly. He dropped 2 massive leather-bound binders directly onto the center of the mahogany table, right on top of the fraudulent loan documents Kendra had just signed. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. "Let us address your medical claims first, Richard," I said, gesturing to the blue binder on the left. "Mr. Sterling, I invite you to open that file. Inside, you will find a comprehensive neurological and cognitive evaluation completed yesterday afternoon. It was conducted not by a disgraced doctor taking offshore bribes, but by a panel of the 3 top independent psychiatric board members in this state. Their sworn findings confirm that my cognitive function is in the top 1 percentile for my age group. I am completely and legally competent. The fraudulent medical affidavits Richard submitted to your branch are entirely fabricated." Sterling pulled the blue binder toward him, flipping through the certified medical documents, his expression growing darker by the second. "Now let us address the true mental illness in this room." I continued tapping the thick red binder on the right. "This illness is called pathological greed. Richard, you like to parade around this city acting like old money royalty. You look down on me and my family because of the color of our skin. You pretend you are an aristocratic titan of industry, but the truth is, you are nothing but a bankrupt squatter drowning in toxic debt." I looked directly at Sterling. Inside that red binder, Mr. Sterling, is the complete financial forensic history of Richard and his son. It details his quiet termination for embezzlement 8 years ago. It outlines his massive debts to violent private lenders. It also contains the official documentation proving that yesterday morning my blind trust purchased the entire mortgage on Richard's leased mansion. I served him with a 48-hour eviction notice. He is not a wealthy developer securing a routine business loan. He is a desperate broke criminal trying to steal my commercial property to save himself from imminent homelessness. Richard's face turned a sickening shade of gray. His knees buckled slightly and he had to grip the back of his chair to remain standing. He looked at the red binder as if it were an active explosive device. "But forging documents and faking medical records is not where your arrogance ends, Richard," I said, pulling my smartphone from my jacket pocket. "You have a terrible habit of underestimating the people you consider beneath you. You see, I have been listening to every single word you have spoken in your dining room for the past 48 hours. I connected my phone to the high-fidelity Bluetooth speakers embedded in the conference room ceiling. I did not just want Sterling to read about Richard's crimes. I wanted him to hear the absolute contempt Richard held for the very institution he was trying to defraud. "Mr. Sterling, I suggest you listen very closely to what your esteemed client truly thinks of Vanguard Horizon Bank and its underwriting department," I advised, hitting the play button on my screen. Richard's drunken, arrogant voice instantly boomed through the pristine glass room. The audio quality was flawless. "I cannot believe how easy it was," Richard's recorded voice bragged. "The commercial lending director is drawing up a $5 million cash loan against the property as we speak. We sign the final bank paperwork tomorrow afternoon, and the funds hit our offshore account by Friday." The recording crackled slightly before capturing Blake's voice. "You are a genius, Dad." Richard laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. "They are gullible idiots, Blake. Those bank directors are so desperate to rub elbows with my pedigree they will rubber stamp any piece of paper I slide across their desk. They will not even bother to verify the deed until we are already drinking margaritas in Europe." Sterling's face turned completely rigid. The veins in his neck visibly pulsed with absolute professional outrage. He had just heard himself and his entire financial institution being mocked and played for fools by a man he had trusted. But the recording was not over. I let it play straight into the segment regarding my daughter. "That clueless black girl is finally going to be useful." Richard's voice sneered through the speakers, dripping with pure, unadulterated racial malice. "Once her name is on those forged documents, she takes on all the legal liability. We immediately transfer the funds into the offshore accounts, and then we kick that ungrateful ghetto trash to the curb right alongside her senile father. She will go to federal prison, and we will be sitting on a beach with $12 million. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kendra let out a wretched guttural sob, physically collapsing into her chair and burying her face in her hands. The brutal, undeniable truth of her betrayal and her ultimate worthlessness to the men she had chosen over her own father had just been broadcast to the entire room. Richard stood completely frozen, stripped of every single lie he had ever told. His aristocratic reputation, his financial standing, and his false dignity were completely pulverized. He was exposed as a racist, broke, manipulative criminal. He looked around the room, searching for a way out, but my legal team blocked every door. His total destruction was absolute and irreversible. Blake watched his father utterly crumble. He looked at the thick oak doors blocked by my legal team, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. He tried to take a step back toward the corner of the room, but Arthur Holloway shifted his weight, making it abundantly clear that nobody was leaving. Blake swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he adjusted his expensive silk tie in a pathetic attempt to regain some composure. He looked at me, and then looked at Mr. Sterling, his face twisting into a mask of desperate innocence. "This is a complete misunderstanding," Blake stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure in the room. "I had nothing to do with any of this. I swear to you, Mr. Rodney, my father made those plans on his own. I am just as shocked as you are." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a stack of high-resolution glossy photographs, tossing them effortlessly across the mahogany table. They scattered right in front of Blake and Kendra. These were the surveillance photos Marcus had captured. Images of Blake leaving the luxury boutique holding the limited edition crimson leather handbag. Images of Blake holding hands with Chloe, the legal secretary, outside the 4-star hotel. Images of them kissing on the 3rd-floor balcony. "You seem to have a very poor memory for someone who claims innocence, Blake," I stated, my voice cutting through his lies like a surgical scalpel. "Did your father also force you to max out the supplementary credit lines I provided to fund a secret life with his legal secretary? Did he force you to use my stolen money to buy designer bags for your mistress while you plotted to lock your wife in a federal prison cell?" Blake stared at the photographs, his entire body trembling. Kendra, who was already sobbing violently, let out a sharp, agonizing gasp as she looked down at the visual proof of her husband's infidelity. The humiliation was absolute. Blake realized he had absolutely no cards left to play. The money was gone. The affair was public. The fraud was exposed. In a split second of pure cowardice, he turned his back on his own father and his wife. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Kendra. "It was her idea," Blake shouted, his voice shrill and panicked. "She is the one who hated you. She is the one who wanted your money because you cut us off. She mirrored your hard drive. She stole your digital signature. She came up with the plan to drug you so we could get the medical power of attorney. I was just trying to keep my marriage together. She manipulated me into helping her." The sheer, spineless nature of his betrayal hung in the air. He was willing to throw his wife to the wolves to save his own skin. Kendra looked at Blake, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and total devastation. The man she had abandoned her family for the man she had committed federal crimes to please was actively trying to hand her over to the authorities. Before Kendra could even attempt to formulate a defense, Camille stepped forward from my side. My wife moved with the terrifying, deliberate grace of a lioness. She reached into her structured leather handbag and pulled out a small, unmarked plastic bottle. The sharp clatter of the plastic hitting the polished mahogany table made everyone in the room jump. "Do not try to play the victim, Kendra." Camille said, her voice vibrating with a cold, righteous fury that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the glass room. "We know exactly what you did. We have the toxicology reports." Camille pointed at the plastic bottle sitting next to the forged loan documents. "You walked into our home, smiled at the man who raised you, and tried to hand him a lethal cocktail of military-grade hallucinogens and heavy sedatives. You tried to poison his mind so you could steal his legacy. You traded your soul for a seat at a table with racists who view you as nothing more than biological garbage." The reality of the situation finally crushed the last remaining pillar of Kendra's arrogant facade. The full weight of her actions, the sheer evil of her betrayal, and the inescapable consequences of her crimes crashed down upon her all at once. Her legs gave out completely. She slid out of her leather executive chair and collapsed onto the floor. She crawled on her knees across the expensive carpet, stopping just inches from my polished shoes. She reached out with trembling hands, grabbing the fabric of my trousers. "Dad, please," she wailed, her voice a ragged, wretched sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Please save me. They tricked me. I was desperate and confused. They manipulated my mind. I am your daughter. Please do not let them send me to prison. I will do anything. I will give it all back. Please, Daddy, protect me. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman weeping uncontrollably at my feet. 5 years ago, seeing her cry would have broken my heart into a million pieces. I would have moved heaven and earth to protect her from any harm. I would have given my last breath to ensure her safety. But the woman begging on the floor was no longer the little girl I had raised. She was a stranger who had actively participated in a conspiracy to destroy my life. I did not bend down to comfort her. I did not raise my voice in anger. I simply looked at her with eyes completely devoid of warmth. I stepped back, forcing her hands to fall away from my trousers. You lost the right to call me your father the day you decided my life was worth less than a country club membership. I said, my voice low and terrifyingly calm. I do not have a daughter who refers to the man actively trying to murder me as Dad. You sat in a dining room and listened to these bankrupt frauds mock your heritage and plot your eventual imprisonment, and you still walked into this bank today to sign those fraudulent papers. You had a dozen opportunities to walk away to come to me and confess, but your greed was stronger than your conscience. You wanted the $8 million more than you wanted a father. Kendra sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands, swaying back and forth on the floor. I am sorry, she gasped repeatedly, her tears staining the carpet. I am so sorry. Apologies are for broken windows and missed birthdays. Kendra, I replied, stepping around her prone form. They do not cover attempted poisoning and federal wire fraud. I am not going to save you. You built a house of lies with these men, and now you are going to burn inside it with them. I turned my attention away from her, completely dismissing her existence. She was out of options. She had no money, no allies, and no escape route. The family she chose had betrayed her, and the family she abandoned had permanently closed the door. I looked back at Mr. Sterling, who was standing behind his desk watching the destruction of this fake aristocratic family with wide, unblinking eyes. He had just witnessed the total collapse of a massive criminal conspiracy in real time right inside his own boardroom. Mr. Sterling, I believe your bank was just seconds away from authorizing an $8 million wire transfer based on these documents, I said, gesturing to the stack of forged papers still resting on the table. Sterling swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses nervously. Yes, Mr. Rodney, he replied, his professional composure struggling to return. Given this new information, I will absolutely terminate the transaction and shred these agreements immediately. The bank will file a comprehensive fraud report with local law enforcement regarding Richard and his associates. I smiled, a thin, razor-sharp smile. That will not be necessary, Mr. Sterling, I said smoothly. I do not want you to shred those documents. I want you to keep them exactly where they are. In fact, I insist that you proceed with the collateral evaluation for that property. Sterling frowned, clearly confused by my request. But sir, he stated hesitatingly, they do not own the property. You just proved they forged the warranty deed to steal your commercial land. Why would we proceed? I turned to look at Richard, whose face was still a mask of pale, terrified confusion. Because, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice projecting a lethal finality, the land they just fraudulently transferred and attempted to mortgage does not belong to me anymore. Sterling stared at me, his brow furrowed in deep, profound confusion. He looked down at the stack of forged documents resting on the table and then back up at me. If the property does not belong to you anymore, Mr. Rodney, he asked, his voice trembling slightly, who exactly does it belong to? Before I could answer, the full weight of the situation finally crashed down on the regional bank director. The realization that he had been mere seconds away from authorizing an $8 million wire transfer to a group of fraudulent grifters hit him like a physical blow. The professional composure he had maintained for the last decade completely evaporated in an instant. His face turned a dark mottled red as he spun to face Richard. You absolute parasite, Sterling roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table so hard the gold fountain pen jumped. You walked into my branch, you sat at my conference table, and you tried to make me the unwitting accomplice to a massive financial crime. You thought you could use my institution to bail out your pathetic bankrupt lifestyle. Richard shrank back, pressing himself against the frosted glass wall, unable to form a coherent sentence. Sterling was not finished. Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? Sterling continued, his voice echoing with fierce corporate fury. Vanguard Horizon Bank does not simply shred documents when we catch a rat in our vault. We completely crush them. I am going to personally ensure that our legal department seizes every single asset you mistakenly believe you still own. We are going to take the luxury cars you drive, the designer clothes in your closet, and whatever loose change you have hidden in your offshore shell accounts. We are going to lock you in a civil litigation nightmare that will last until the day you die. Sterling grabbed the fraudulent warranty deed and the signed loan agreements, holding them up like a weapon. You signed these papers in my presence, Richard. You and your son and your daughter-in-law executed a fraudulent collateral pledge right in front of me. The bank is going to confiscate this very deed. We will take possession of this $8 million plot of land to satisfy the punitive damages and the enormous legal fees you are about to incur. We will liquidate this commercial zone and leave you with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back. You picked the wrong bank to defraud, you arrogant fool. I watched Sterling unleash his righteous corporate anger, letting him completely exhaust his tirade before I made my next calculated move. The room was practically vibrating with intense physical tension. Richard was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the blocked exit doors. Blake was completely paralyzed, clutching the edge of his leather chair as if he were falling from a great height. I took a slow, measured step toward the head of the conference table and raised my hand, a simple, commanding gesture that instantly grabbed the attention of everyone in the room. "I truly appreciate your fierce dedication to the bank, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice smooth and projecting a terrifying calm. "But I am afraid you cannot confiscate that property. You cannot liquidate the land, and you certainly cannot use it to satisfy any punitive damages for your institution." Sterling blinked, slowly lowering the documents. "Why not?" he asked, his anger momentarily replaced by total bewilderment. "If they forged the transfer and the property originally belonged to your holding company, the bank has the absolute right to pursue it as restitution for the attempted fraud." I offered a cold, razor-sharp smile that made Richard physically recoil. "Because, Mr. Sterling, that specific parcel of land in the West River District is no longer a commercial zoning opportunity," I explained, delivering every single word with absolute lethal precision. Exactly 4 weeks ago, I initiated a complete and irrevocable philanthropic transfer. I officially donated the entire acreage to the United States government. More specifically, I transferred the deed directly to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to be converted into a highly restricted ecological wildlife preserve. The state registry processing simply operates on a 30-day administrative delay, which is exactly why the property still appeared available when Richard hastily checked the public records. He was so incredibly greedy and so desperate to steal my wealth that he did not bother to conduct a thorough legal title trace. He just saw the $8 million valuation and blindly mirrored my digital signature to grab it. The absolute silence in the executive boardroom was deafening. The air grew incredibly heavy as the magnitude of my words slowly permeated the minds of the criminals standing before me. I watched the remaining blood drain completely out of Richard's face. He suddenly looked like a corpse wearing a tailored suit. He finally realized the true devastating scale of the trap he had sprinted into. He had not just stolen a piece of dirt from a retired real estate developer. He had stolen a protected environmental sanctuary. He was holding a deed that was a ticking federal bomb. I turned my gaze entirely onto Richard and Blake, letting the brutal reality of their situation crush whatever microscopic shred of hope they had left. "You see, Richard," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality, "stealing from a private citizen is a state-level crime. It gets you a local detective, a county prosecutor, and maybe a few years in a state penitentiary. But that is not what you did today." I pointed directly at the stack of documents resting on the mahogany table. "When you used my stolen digital signature to authorize that warranty deed transfer, you did not steal from me. You stole a multi-million-dollar asset directly from the United States government. And when you forced Kendra to sign those collateral loan agreements right here in this room, you actively attempted to defraud a federally insured banking institution using stolen government property as your leverage." Arthur Holloway, my lead corporate litigator, stepped forward from the perimeter of the room, seamlessly picking up my tactical breakdown. He crossed his arms and looked at Richard with pure professional disgust. "What Mr. Rodney is explaining to you is the fundamental difference between a simple fraud charge and a catastrophic federal indictment," Holloway stated, his voice booming with legal authority. "You have committed a Class A federal felony. You have violated multiple strict statutes regarding the theft of federal lands, interstate wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The documents sitting on this table are not just voided contracts. They are a signed, verified, written confession to crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. The signatures on those pages are your absolute death warrants. Blake let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. He backed away from the table as if the forged documents were going to spontaneously combust. He looked at his father, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Dad," he gasped, his voice cracking completely. "Dad, what did you do? You told me this was foolproof. You told me we were safe. You just handed us over to the federal government." Richard could not even formulate a basic response. His jaw moved up and down, but no words came out. His aristocratic arrogance, his racist superiority, his entire fake legacy had been completely obliterated by a single piece of donated real estate. He had built an entire criminal conspiracy on the foundation of his own unyielding greed, and I had simply provided him with the exact rope he needed to hang himself. Kendra was still huddled on the floor, weeping uncontrollably, her tears staining the expensive carpet. She finally understood that her attempt to play the brilliant mastermind had resulted in her signing a direct confession to a federal crime against the United States government. I looked at the three of them, shattered, broken, and completely trapped. They had tried to take my money, my freedom, and my mind. They had mocked my heritage and plotted to leave my daughter taking the ultimate fall. Now they were standing in a pristine glass room waiting for a reckoning they could not buy their way out of. "Mr. Sterling," I said, turning back to the bank director who was staring at the scene in absolute awe. "I believe those documents are now classified as federal evidence. You might want to step away from the table. The authorities are going to want those perfectly preserved." The air in the conference room was already thick with absolute terror when the distant wail of sirens finally pierced the thick, soundproof glass of the building. The high-pitched electronic screech grew louder and more piercing, with every passing second multiplying until it sounded like an entire fleet of emergency vehicles was surrounding the Vanguard Horizon Bank headquarters. Richard snapped his head toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, his chest heaving with sheer panic. He stumbled backward, crashing into the frosted glass wall as the heavy thud of tactical boots echoed down the exterior marble hallway. They were moving with rapid, aggressive military precision. Before Blake could even attempt to formulate a pathetic escape route, the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom burst open for the second time that morning. They did not just swing open, they were violently thrust apart. A specialized tactical unit of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents stormed into the pristine room. They wore dark tactical vests emblazoned with bright yellow letters and moved with absolute lethal efficiency. Weapons were drawn and held at the low ready. "Nobody move!" a senior agent bellowed, his voice carrying the absolute thunder of federal authority. "Step away from the table and keep your hands where I can see them." Mr. Sterling immediately backed away against the far wall, raising his hands in strict compliance. My legal team shifted smoothly to the perimeter, giving the federal agents a clear, unobstructed path to the targets. Richard froze, his hands trembling violently in the air. Blake let out a high-pitched shriek and dropped to his knees, putting his hands behind his head before anyone even gave him a direct order to do so. The sheer cowardice of the man was on full display. The senior agent marched directly up to the mahogany table, his eyes locking onto the forged collateral agreements and the fake warranty deed still sitting next to the gold fountain pen. He did not touch them. He simply nodded to a forensic specialist who stepped forward with thick plastic evidence bags. "Richard, you are under federal arrest," the senior agent announced, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "You are being charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States government, interstate wire fraud, and attempted bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it today." The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tight around Richard's wrists echoed through the boardroom like a final death knell. The federal agents did not treat him like an old money aristocrat or a respected corporate executive. They treated him exactly like the common violent criminal he truly was. They yanked his arms roughly behind his back, forcing his expensive tailored suit jacket to bunch up awkwardly around his shoulders. Blake was weeping openly now, heavy tears streaming down his flushed face as an agent hauled him up from the floor by his biceps. He begged and pleaded, spouting pathetic, incoherent excuses, claiming he was forced into the scheme, but the agents completely ignored his rambling. Kendra was pulled up from the carpet, her conservative beige dress ruined, and her face completely swollen from crying. She did not even try to look at me as the cold steel locked around her wrists. The tactical team formed a tight perimeter around the three prisoners and began marching them out of the boardroom. I followed closely behind with Camille at my side, stepping out into the grand marble hallway of the executive floor. The timing was absolutely perfect. It was the busiest hour of the morning, and the main lobby of Vanguard Horizon Bank was packed with elite investors, corporate clients, and wealthy socialites. As the federal agents frog-marched Richard toward the main elevators, every single conversation in the massive building instantly stopped. Hundreds of eyes turned to witness the spectacular downfall. Richard tried to lower his head to hide his face from the crowd of his supposed peers, but the senior agent kept a firm grip on his shoulder, forcing him to walk completely upright. People began pulling out their smartphones, recording the stunning scene. The man who had spent the last 5 years parading around country clubs, boasting about his fake pedigree and looking down on minorities, was now being paraded through a public lobby in handcuffs. Whispers and gasps rippled through the crowd of wealthy onlookers. They pointed at Blake, who was actively sobbing like a child, and at Kendra, who kept her eyes glued to the marble floor in absolute shame. The humiliation was total and inescapable. Richard's legacy was completely vaporized in the span of a 3-minute walk to the exit. He would never again be welcomed in any polite society. He would forever be remembered as the desperate fraud who tried to steal federal land and got caught red-handed. I stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, looking down into the bustling lobby as the federal agents forcefully guided the three of them through the revolving glass doors and out into the glaring sunlight. The flashing red and blue lights of the armored transport vehicles painted the pristine bank facade in chaotic, desperate colors. Camille stood quietly beside me, her posture straight and her expression completely serene. We watched as Richard was roughly shoved into the back of a heavily armored federal transport van, his head pushed down by an agent hand to clear the doorframe. The heavy metal door slammed shut, locking him inside a dark steel cage. I felt absolutely no pity for him. I felt no remorse for Blake, and I certainly felt no lingering parental sympathy for Kendra. For 5 years, Richard had looked at me with sheer disgust. He believed his white skin and his fictional aristocratic bloodline gave him the inherent right to consume the wealth I had bled to build. He thought my success was an unnatural anomaly that he was rightfully correcting. He treated me as less than human while actively plotting to strip away my mental competency and throw me into a locked psychiatric ward. He wanted to strip me of my fundamental human rights. Now I was standing as a free, wealthy, and fully vindicated man, watching the federal government permanently strip him of his. When those heavy steel doors closed, Richard lost everything. He lost his freedom of movement, his ability to wear tailored suits, his access to fine dining, and his completely fabricated social status. He was no longer a distinguished gentleman. He was just a federal inmate with a designated identification number. He would be told when to sleep, when to wake up, and when to eat for the rest of his natural life. Blake would learn exactly how far his arrogance and his cowardice would get him in a maximum security federal penitentiary. And Kendra, the daughter who had traded her own blood for a taste of their racist privilege, would spend the best years of her life behind razor wire, completely abandoned by the men she had sacrificed her soul to impress. I reached out and took Camille's hand. Her grip was warm and remarkably strong. We did not need to speak. The justice we had just witnessed was profound and absolute. The wolves had tried to surround our home and devour our legacy. Instead, they had walked directly into a perfectly constructed snare and locked the iron gate themselves. I turned away from the grand staircase and walked back toward the executive boardroom with my legal team. The immediate threat was completely neutralized, but the tactical execution was not quite finished. We had a trial to prepare for and a final devastating message to deliver. 3 months later, the federal courthouse became the final graveyard for Richard and his fabricated legacy. The trial was stunningly brief and utterly devastating. When you have high-resolution surveillance footage, intercepted audio recordings, forged documents bearing physical signatures, and the star witness testimony of their own severely injured defense attorney, there is absolutely no room for legal maneuvering. The federal prosecutors did not even break a sweat. They laid out the conspiracy with surgical precision, stripping away every single lie Richard had ever told. They played the audio of Richard plotting my murder and mocking the bank executives to a completely silent room. Richard sat at the defense table, a hollow, broken shell of the arrogant man he once was. His bespoke, tailored suits had been permanently replaced by a shapeless, bright orange prison jumpsuit. His skin was pale and his posture was completely defeated. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at me. The presiding judge, A no-nonsense woman with zero tolerance for white-collar greed, delivered the sentencing with a voice like cracking ice. She stated that their actions were a masterclass in pure, unadulterated malice. Richard, as the primary architect of the conspiracy to defraud the United States government and orchestrate a vehicular homicide, received a mandatory sentence of 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Blake, weeping openly at the defense table and trembling like a frightened child, was sentenced to 10 years for his active role in the wire fraud and conspiracy. Kendra stood before the judge looking absolutely shattered. Her designer clothes and perfectly styled hair were distant memories replaced by the harsh reality of an inmate uniform. She looked exhausted and terrified. The judge showed her no leniency, noting that she had willingly attempted to medically incapacitate her own father with military-grade hallucinogens for pure financial gain. She was handed a strict sentence of 8 years in a federal correctional institution. As the federal marshals led them away in heavy iron chains, I sat in the front row of the gallery with Camille. We did not smile. We did not cheer. We simply watched the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swing shut, sealing their fate behind a wall of reinforced steel. The justice system had done its job, but my personal closure required one final interaction. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I was sitting in my study reviewing the final transfer documents for the new philanthropic foundation I was establishing. The house was quiet and incredibly peaceful. The lingering toxic energy of my daughter and her betrayal had finally been scrubbed clean from our lives. My private smartphone began to ring, vibrating against the mahogany desk. I glanced at the screen. The caller identification displayed an incoming collect call from a federal correctional facility in the Northern District. I knew exactly who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly pressed the accept button. A robotic automated voice warned me that the call was originating from an inmate at a federal prison and was subject to strict monitoring and recording. I pressed the number 1 on my keypad to accept the charges. A shaky, ragged breath filled the speaker. Dad, Kendra whimpered, her voice cracking with sheer desperation and profound exhaustion. "Please do not hang up on me. Please just listen to me for 1 minute." I remained completely silent, letting her agonizing pause stretch out over the secure line. "I am in hell, Dad," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a frantic, rushed panic. "This place is an absolute nightmare. I am terrified every single second of the day. The other inmates know I come from money, and they hate me. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. The appeal lawyers say they can get my sentence reduced, but I need a massive legal retainer. They are demanding $200,000 up front to even look at my case file and file a motion for bail pending the appeal. I have absolutely nothing left. The government seized all the bank accounts, and Blake family is completely bankrupt. You are the only person in the entire world who can help me. I am begging you. I know I was wrong. I know I did unforgivable things to you and Camille. But I am still your daughter. You cannot just leave me in here to rot in a concrete cell. Please post the bail money. Please pay for the appeal attorney. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I will do whatever you want. Just please get me out of this cage." She wept uncontrollably into the receiver, gasping for air. She was a broken woman, stripped of her country club delusions and forced to face the brutal reality of the criminal justice system. She wanted a savior. She wanted the father she had callously discarded to swoop in and rescue her from the monster she had willingly become. I listened to her desperate pleas, analyzing the sheer panic vibrating in her throat. I thought back to the day exactly 5 years ago when she packed her bags and walked out of my house. I remembered the exact words she had thrown in my face when I warned her about Richard and Blake being nothing but sophisticated con artists. I remembered the day she married into that fake aristocratic family and deliberately excluded me from the ceremony. When I had called her back then asking why her own father was not on the guest list, she had spoken to me with a cold, cruel arrogance that permanently scarred my heart. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my voice into a tone of absolute, unyielding ice. "Kendra," I said, cutting through her frantic sobbing with devastating clarity. "Do you remember the phone call we had 5 years ago on the evening of your wedding? Do you remember what you told me when I asked why I was not allowed to walk my only daughter down the aisle?" The line went completely dead silent except for the faint static of the prison connection. Kendra's breath hitched in her throat. "I know you remember," I continued, my words striking like physical blows. "You laughed at me. You told me that my presence would embarrass your new wealthy family. You said you were stepping into a higher class of society and you did not want my background ruining your image. And then you told me that your wedding was an exclusive event and that you only invited special people. The silence on her end was entirely suffocating. She knew exactly what she had said. The absolute cruelty of her own past words was finally echoing back to her within the cold, unforgiving walls of a federal prison. I do not have $200,000 for your legal defense, Kendra. I stated, my voice radiating a chilling finality. I have tens of millions of dollars sitting in secure blind trusts, but that money is reserved for philanthropic causes, for building up my community, and for protecting my true family. The bail money you are begging for, the financial salvation you are crying out to receive, that is an incredibly exclusive privilege. And as you so clearly established 5 years ago, I only reserve my resources for special people. Dad. No, Kendra screamed, a guttural, agonizing shriek of pure horror as she realized her absolute doom. Please do not do this. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. The line disconnected instantly, severing the connection forever. I set the phone down on my mahogany desk and looked out the large bay window. The sun was shining brightly over my manicured lawn. I had completely purged the poison from my life. The betrayal, the deceit, the racist arrogance, and the ungrateful greed had all been locked away behind iron bars. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound, permanent peace settle over my shoulders. 6 months after that final phone call, we decided it was time for a change of scenery. The quiet suburban house had served its purpose. It had been a sanctuary and then a fortress, but it was time to step back into the light. I made a single phone call to my top real estate broker and purchased the premier penthouse suite in the tallest residential tower in the financial district. It was a property I had actually developed decades ago, but had never occupied. Now it felt like the perfect throne. We left the old furniture and the lingering bad memories behind. When Camille and I walked into our new home, the floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the sprawling city skyline, the very same skyline I had helped build with my own 2 hands. The air up here felt entirely different. It was crisp, clean, and completely devoid of the suffocating toxic energy that had plagued us for the last 5 years. For the longest time, I had downplayed my success. I wore simple sweaters and drove an old silver sedan because I thought humility would keep the vultures at bay. I thought masking my true wealth would somehow protect my daughter from the corrupting influence of extreme privilege and keep her grounded. But I learned the hard way that a parasite does not care how humble the host tries to appear. A parasite only cares about draining the lifeblood until there is absolutely nothing left to consume. Standing on that massive wraparound balcony holding Camille's hand, I felt a profound and absolute sense of liberation. We were no longer hiding in plain sight. We were no longer playing a defensive game against our own flesh and blood. The leeches had been permanently detached and legally discarded. Every morning I wake up and drink my black coffee, looking down at the bustling streets below, knowing that my empire is entirely secure. Camille walks the expansive marble floors with a brilliant smile that had been missing for years. There are no fake aristocratic in-laws plotting to steal my commercial deeds. There are no dirty cops knocking on my door with forged warrants. There is only the quiet, pristine peace that comes from surviving a brutal war and emerging completely victorious. We reclaimed our lives, and we were finally going to enjoy the incredible fruits of our lifelong labor without ever having to constantly look over our shoulders again. But enjoying our wealth did not mean simply hoarding it in offshore accounts like Richard and Blake had desperately tried to do. True power is not just about accumulating capital, it is about weaponizing that capital to leave a permanent mark on the world. Richard had looked down on me because of the color of my skin. He believed that generational wealth belonged exclusively to people who looked like him. Kendra had hired a corrupt, disgraced white doctor to falsely declare me insane so she could steal my legacy. I decided to take the exact sum of money they had tried to steal from the commercial property transaction and use it to completely rewrite the narrative. I established the Vanguard Horizon Medical Scholarship Foundation with an initial endowment of $12 million. The mission of the foundation was highly specific and deeply personal. We provide full-ride scholarships, living stipends, and elite mentorship programs exclusively for underprivileged Black students entering the medical field. We are funding the next generation of brilliant ethical physicians, psychiatrists, and surgeons who will actually serve our communities with integrity. Every time a young black student graduates from a top-tier medical school without a single dime of crippling student loan debt, I know I have struck another devastating blow against the racist ideology that fueled Richard's entire conspiracy. It is the ultimate form of high-level revenge. I did not just send those criminals to a federal penitentiary. I took the very wealth they salivated over the money they were willing to commit murder to obtain, and I injected it directly into the exact community they despised. I am using my fortune to create real, highly qualified medical professionals to directly counteract the kind of corrupt, dirty doctors my daughter tried to use against me. Recently, we held our first annual foundation gala in the grand ballroom of the very same downtown hotel where Blake used to take his mistress. I stood on the stage looking out at a sea of brilliant, determined young faces. They were the future. They were the true legacy I was leaving behind. Camille stood beside me, beaming with absolute pride. We took the absolute worst betrayal imaginable, and we transmuted it into a beacon of hope and generational progress. Richard, Blake, and Kendra are sitting in their concrete cells wearing cheap orange jumpsuits staring at blank walls. Meanwhile, the money they bled for is currently putting brilliant young black men and women through medical school. That is how you execute a perfect total victory. You do not just destroy your enemies. You build a monument to their failure using the very bricks they tried to steal from your foundation. Looking back on this entire grueling ordeal, I have come to realize a cold, hard, undeniable truth about the nature of family and human loyalty. I used to believe that blood was the thickest bond on earth. I thought that because I gave my daughter life, because I provided for her and protected her, she would inherently possess a sense of unbreakable loyalty and love toward me. But I was dangerously wrong. Blood does not make you family. Blood just makes you biologically related. Loyalty, respect, and unyielding integrity are what actually forge a true family. Camille is my true family. The brilliant lawyers and investigators who stood by my side and fought tooth and nail to protect my life and my legacy, they are my true family. Kendra was just a biological accident who allowed the pursuit of unearned wealth to completely rot her soul. I used to think the absolute greatest pain a father could ever experience was losing a daughter he deeply loved. But I learned that the actual greatest pain is destroying your own peace of mind by trying to keep a venomous snake inside your house just because it happens to share your last name. Secrets are never completely silent. They always leave a digital trail. They echo in the quiet moments they reflect in the sudden shift of a gaze, and they eventually scream the ugly truth when the pressure gets too high. To anyone out there who is dealing with greedy, ungrateful relatives who look at you and only see a walking bank account, hear my words carefully. Do not let your misplaced sense of familial duty blind you to the dark reality of their actions. Do not let them drain your finances, manipulate your emotions, or threaten your sanity. You owe them absolutely nothing. The greatest and most satisfying revenge you can ever enact against people who view you as a disposable resource is to completely cut off their access and watch them starve on their own arrogance. Let their own toxic greed dig the grave and then simply hand them the shovel. They will happily do the rest of the work for you. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a long, brutal war, but the beautiful peace I have now is worth every single battle. If my journey resonated with you, if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and dignity, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a family betrayal this deep? How did you handle it? Share your stories because speaking the truth is the first step to taking back your absolute power. Until next time, stay sharp. Trust your instincts and never, ever let anyone underestimate your worth. Another profound lesson I took away from this ordeal is the sheer danger of mistaking kindness for weakness. People who operate entirely on arrogance and entitlement always underestimate those who choose to live quietly. Richard and his son saw my comfortable sweaters and my calm demeanor and assumed I was a powerless victim waiting to be sheared. They failed to realize that the loudest people in the room are usually the weakest, while the ones who observe in silence are gathering the ammunition. Never feel pressured to prove your strength to people who are too blind to see it because you can just let their ignorance be the very weapon that destroys them. If you want to hear more stories about taking back control and outsmarting the toxic people in your life, make sure you ring that notification bell and join our community today.